She drove a car worth $400,000 into a garage where the coffee maker was held together with electrical tape. She came because no one else could fix it. 3 Ferrari dealerships, 2 master technicians flown in from New York, 1 specialist from Stuttgart who charged $1,200 just to look at the engine, and still couldn't find the problem. Then someone whispered a name that didn't belong in Hartley, Ohio. A name that didn't belong anywhere near cracked concrete floors and hand-painted signs and a mechanic who charged $40 an hour. She almost didn't come. She almost let pride win. And if she had, she would have missed the most important thing that ever walked into her life, wearing oil-stained work boots and saying almost nothing at all. If this story moves you, hit that like button. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this one's going to take a while. And it's worth every minute. The alarm went off at 5:14 every morning, not because Mason Cole set it for that time on purpose, but because the clock had been wrong for 8 months, and he'd never gotten around to fixing it. He lay there for a moment in the gray half-dark of his bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settle around him. The furnace ticking in the basement, the old pipes moaning somewhere in the walls, the particular creak of the 3rd floorboard outside Emma's room that told him she was still asleep. He knew every sound this house made. He'd learned them the way a sailor learns the sounds of his ship. Not by studying, but by surviving. He got up. He always got up. The kitchen was cold. He started the coffee. The machine sputtered and hissed and eventually produced something dark enough to pass. And he stood at the window over the sink, watching the sky turn from black to the particular shade of gray that meant November in Northeast Ohio. The yard was mostly dead grass and one stubborn oak that refused to finish dropping its leaves. The fence needed painting. The gutters needed clearing. The list of things this house needed was long, and Mason kept it somewhere in the back of his mind the way other men kept grocery lists. Always there, occasionally consulted, rarely finished. He heard the floorboard creak. "Dad." Emma's voice was still thick with sleep when she appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her dark hair flattened on one side. Wearing the oversized Ohio State sweatshirt she'd commandeered from his closet 6 months ago and considered permanently hers now. She was 8 years old and small for her age and absolutely, stubbornly certain about everything. "Hey, Bug." He poured her orange juice without being asked. She climbed onto the bar stool at the counter and wrapped both hands around the glass. "Is it cold out?" "Cold enough." "Do I need the heavy coat?" "You need the heavy coat." She made a face, the specific face that communicated she found the heavy coat aesthetically offensive, but didn't argue. This was one of their rhythms. She pushed back on the small things and let the real things stand. She was 8, but sometimes Mason looked at her and forgot that. He scrambled eggs. She talked. She talked the way she always talked in the morning, in long winding streams about things she'd been thinking about before she fell asleep the night before. Ideas that had apparently been running in her head through the night and were now ready for release. This morning, it was something she'd read in the library book she'd checked out 3 weeks ago and renewed twice. A book about aerodynamics written for adults that she'd picked up because she liked the picture on the cover. And the thing is, the drag coefficient isn't just about the shape of the body, it's about air management, she was saying, stabbing at her eggs. Like, you can have a beautiful curve on the front and completely mess up the underneath. That's why underbody aero is actually more important than people think. The Ferrari guys figured that out in the 90s. Well, she paused, looked at her eggs, pushed them around a little. Some of them figured it out. Mason kept his eyes on the skillet. "Uh-huh. You knew that, right? Finish your eggs." "Dad." "Emma." She gave him the look, the one that was too old for her face, too knowing for someone who'd only been alive 8 years, and went back to her eggs. He poured himself more coffee and leaned against the counter and watched her eat, and the particular weight that lived in his chest every morning shifted slightly, the way it always did when she was in the room. Not gone. Never completely gone. But shifted. Manageable. He dropped her at school at 7:50, waited until she disappeared through the front doors with her enormous backpack that was almost as big as she was, then drove the 12 minutes to the shop. Cole's Auto and Repair sat on Millworks Road on what had once been the industrial edge of Hartley before the industrial edge moved further out and left this stretch behind, a row of buildings that couldn't quite decide if they were being renovated or abandoned. There was a brake shop 2 doors down that had been under new management for 4 years and a vacant lot next to that, where someone had once planned to build a storage facility and then apparently changed their mind and left the foundation sitting there like an unfinished thought. Mason's shop was the kind of place that people described, if they described it at all, as fine. The sign above the door, Cole's Auto and Repair in faded red letters, had a burned-out R that he'd been meaning to replace since August. The waiting area had 3 plastic chairs that didn't match, and a coffee table with a crack in it, and a stack of magazines from 2019 that nobody ever read. The shop itself was 3 bays, 2 lifts, and a back room where Mason kept his tools, which were, notably, the one thing in the entire building that was neither faded nor cracked nor in need of repair. His tools were perfect, had been for 15 years. He maintained them the way some men maintained vintage cars, with precision and something close to reverence. His one full-time employee, Danny Reyes, was already there when Mason arrived, crouched under a 2017 Silverado on the second lift, running a light along the exhaust system. Danny was 24 and had been working at the shop for 2 years and was, Mason privately thought, better than he knew. A natural diagnostician who made up in intuition what he occasionally lacked in patience. "Morning," Danny said without looking up. "Morning." Mason hung his jacket on the hook by the office door. "What's the truck?" "Exhaust leak. Guy says it started last week." Danny clicked his tongue. "It's been going a lot longer than that. Look at this corrosion." Mason looked. Danny was right. "Call him," Mason said. Get authorization before you go further." "Already left a message." Mason went to the coffee maker. A different machine than the one at home, older, reliable, in the way that old machines become reliable once everything unreliable about them has already broken, and poured himself a cup he didn't entirely need and stood in the doorway of the second bay, looking out at Millworks Road. It was, by most measurements, a quiet life, which was exactly what he'd built it to be. The red Ferrari arrived at 11:47. Mason heard it before he saw it. That particular engine note, low and complex and expensive, a sound that didn't belong on Millworks Road the way a concert pianist doesn't belong playing in a diner. He was in the third bay working on a Subaru with a coolant issue, and he straightened up and wiped his hands and watched through the open bay door as the car turned into his lot. It was a 296 GTB, maybe 18 months old based on the build. He could tell by the rear diffuser configuration. Rosso Corsa, the kind of red that costs extra because it's not just red, it's Ferrari red, a specific shade that the company had spent decades making synonymous with a feeling. It pulled into the lot slowly and stopped, and for a moment nothing happened, as if the car itself was reconsidering. Then the door opened. Scarlett Hayes got out of the car the way people get out of cars when they're used to being looked at, not performing it exactly, but not unaware of it either. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a silk blouse and slacks that had probably cost more than Mason's monthly mortgage payment, and she stood beside the Ferrari and looked at the shop and did not bother to hide what she thought of it, which was not much. Mason watched her look at the burned-out R in the sign, watched her look at the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, watched her look at the plastic chairs visible through the waiting room window. Her expression didn't change dramatically. She was too controlled for that, but something around her eyes tightened, the way a person's eyes tighten when they've arrived somewhere and immediately regret it. She looked like she was calculating how quickly she could leave. Danny appeared at Mason's elbow. "Is that a 296 GTB?" "Yep." "That's like $400,000 sitting in our parking lot." "Yep." "Is she lost?" "I don't think so." Mason set down the rag he'd been holding. "I'll go talk to her." He walked out through the bay door into the cold November air. Scarlett Hayes turned when she heard his boots on the asphalt, and she looked at him, really looked, the way executives look at things they're assessing, and something in her expression suggested he hadn't passed the assessment yet. "I was 6 feet tall and lean from real work, not from a gym, with dark hair that was probably 3 weeks past when it should have been cut, and 2 days of stubble that was there because he'd gotten up at 5:14 and scrambled eggs and driven Emma to school and hadn't thought about his face. His hands were clean. He'd washed them coming out. But there was a faint shadow of grease along the edge of his left thumbnail that soap didn't entirely touch. I was wearing the gray work shirt with Coles embroidered on the left chest, in that same faded red as the sign outside. He looked exactly like what he was. A mechanic. In a small shop. In a town most people drove through without stopping. "Help you?" he said. Scarlet Hayes studied him for a half second longer than felt comfortable. I called yesterday about the car. I remember. He had in fact talked to her assistant, a very efficient woman named Patricia, who had explained in precise detail that Ms. Hayes's vehicle was experiencing an intermittent power loss under high load, and that 3 separate service centers, including 2 Ferrari-certified dealerships and 1 independent specialist in Columbus, had been unable to diagnose the issue, and that Ms. Hayes required the problem resolved as quickly as possible. Mason had said he'd take a look. Patricia had paused, clearly expecting more. Some expression of enthusiasm, maybe, or some indication that he appreciated the gravity of being asked. And then she'd said, "So you'll see her tomorrow?" And he'd said, "Sure." Now Scarlet Hayes was standing in his parking lot, looking at him with the particular look of a woman who had not expected to be here, wherever here turned out to be, and was already wondering who had led her to this decision. "I have to be honest with you," she said. "I'm not sure what I expected, but..." She glanced back at the sign, at the burned-out R. "This isn't it." "Okay," Mason said. She blinked. That was apparently not the response she'd expected. "I'm not trying to be rude, I've had 3 specialists look at this car. Ferrari sent a technician from their Eastern Service Division. He was here for 2 days." "I know, Patricia mentioned that." "And they couldn't find anything. I know that too. So I'm not sure what..." She stopped, seemed to recalibrate. "I've been told you're good. Someone I trust told me you were worth the drive." "Who?" Not that it mattered. He was curious. "Richard Vance. He has a collection in Westerville. 3 classics, including a '72 Daytona. He said you rebuilt the engine." Mason nodded once. He remembered the Daytona. 6 months ago. 3 weeks of work. The kind of job that came along rarely enough that it meant something. "He said you were the best he'd ever worked with," Scarlet Hayes said, and the sentence cost her something. He could hear it, the faint resistance of a woman who didn't give out praise easily and found it irritating to have to. "He also said..." She paused. "He said you were unusual." Richard thinks anybody who doesn't own a boat is unusual. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the beginning of the conditions that might eventually produce one. It disappeared quickly. "Then you look at it or not?" she said. "I can look at it," he said. He walked to the Ferrari. She stood back and watched him, arms crossed, with the posture of someone prepared to be disappointed. Danny hovered in the bay door behind him, pretending not to stare at the car. Mason walked slowly around the 296 GTB, not touching it yet, just looking. The car was in otherwise perfect condition. Not a scratch, waxed within the last week, tires with maybe 4,000 miles on them. Whoever drove this car loved it, in the possessive way that people love expensive things, where love and ownership become difficult to distinguish. He crouched at the rear and looked at the exhaust outlets, straightened up and moved to the front and looked at the brake cooling ducts. Then he opened the driver's door and leaned in and started the engine. The V6 hybrid system came alive with that distinctive Ferrari sound, complex and layered, more refined than the old V8s, less immediately visceral, but technically more sophisticated. He listened. He stood with his hand resting lightly on the door frame and his eyes closed, and he listened to that engine the way a doctor listens to a chest. Not passively, not waiting for something obvious, but actively parsing the sound into its components, sorting through what he knew against what he was hearing. There it was, faint, intermittent, a frequency inside the intake note that didn't belong, a ghost of something fractionally wrong appearing and then vanishing before it could be tracked. It wasn't in the exhaust, wasn't in the hybrid system. The electric motors were clean. It was in the intake, and it was something structural. He straightened up and looked at Scarlet Hayes. "When does the power loss happen?" he asked. "Specific conditions. Above 4,000 RPM. Usually on a sustained pull, highway on-ramp, that kind of thing. Lasts maybe 2 seconds and then it's fine." "How long has it been happening?" 3 weeks? "Does it feel like a miss or a restriction?" She frowned. What does that mean?" "A miss feels like a stumble. A restriction feels like a wall." She thought about it. He could see her actually thinking about it, sorting through her memory. He gave her credit for that. Some people would have just guessed. "A wall," she said. "Like something's blocking and then releasing." He nodded. He already knew what it was. He was 90% sure. "Bring it in," he said. Getting a $400,000 car onto a lift was a process that required equipment Mason had specifically for this purpose. Low-profile lifting pads, a set of adapters he'd machined himself 2 years ago, specifically for the Ferrari-Lamborghini platform geometry. Scarlett Hayes watched him set these up with an expression that suggested she was surprised he had them at all. He noticed her noticing, didn't say anything. Danny helped position the car, and then Mason sent him back to the Silverado because there wasn't anything Danny could do here, and also because Mason worked certain things alone by habit. He lowered himself onto the creeper and slid under the car. The intake system on the 296 GTB was accessible from below. Not easily, but he'd worked on this platform before, years ago, and the geography of it was still present in his hands, even if his mind had tried to file it away. He ran his fingers along the intake manifold, feeling for... There. He almost didn't believe it. He ran his fingers over the same spot again. A fracture. Hairline thin. In the composite intake plenum. Not at a joint or a seam, which would be where anyone would look, but in the middle of a wall, a stress fracture that ran maybe 3 centimeters, and that would flex under pressure, partially collapsing the intake volume under high load, and then springing back as the pressure equalized. It was the kind of flaw that was essentially invisible to diagnostic equipment, because the equipment looked for electrical signals and sensor readings, not for a crack in a part that was theoretically solid. The only way to find it was to listen and then feel. He slid back out from under the car and sat up. Scarlett Hayes was still standing back, arms still crossed, but something in her posture had shifted. She'd moved slightly closer over the past half hour, almost imperceptibly, the way people move toward things that interest them without meaning to. "Found it," he said. "Already?" "It's a fracture in the intake plenum, stress crack. It flexes under high load and partially collapses the intake volume, just enough to cause the restriction you described." She stared at him. Ferrari's technician was here for 2 days. He was probably looking at the sensors and the hybrid controller. The crack isn't anywhere sensors would catch it. You have to listen for it and then feel for it. He stood up. "I can fix it." "How?" "I'll have to fabricate a patch, the right way, not a plug, an actual structural repair. I'll need to machine some composite and use a specific bonding process. It'll hold better than the original part." She was quiet for a moment. "You're saying you can fix it better than Ferrari made it?" "I'm saying I can fix this specific problem so it doesn't come back. That's all I'm saying." Another pause. She was studying him differently now. Less assessment, more something he couldn't immediately name. "How long?" she said. "End of the day." "Today?" "If I start now." She uncrossed her arms. "Fine," she said. "Do it." He worked steadily through the afternoon. No music. He'd tried working with music years ago and found it interfered with the particular kind of attention he needed. The sustained listening that was less about sound and more about the way sound lived in the hands. Danny brought him coffee at 2 o'clock without being asked, set it on the workbench, and left without speaking, which Mason appreciated. Scarlett Hayes did not leave. He'd expected her to go somewhere, make calls, sit in her car with her laptop. She did sit in the waiting area for a while, and he could see her through the interior window, on her phone, the particular clipped efficiency of someone moving through tasks. But between calls, she watched him work. I was aware of being watched, the way he was always aware of things that happened near him, peripherally, without looking. He didn't perform for it, didn't speed up or slow down or do anything differently than he'd do alone. The repair was detailed work. He had to access the plenum, clean the fracture site. Any contamination would compromise the bond, and then apply the composite patch in a specific sequence that required precise temperature control and pressure application. He'd done similar repairs before, different cars, different parts, but the fundamental engineering principle was the same. You weren't just stopping the crack, you were redistributing the stress so the crack didn't recur. When Ferrari engineers designed the plenum, they'd made certain assumptions about load cycles. Mason had worked on enough of these systems to know that real-world use created stresses that tested those assumptions. The original wall thickness was adequate but not generous. His patch would add reinforcement in a way that made the repair stronger than the factory spec. I was finishing the cure cycle at 4:37 when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, saw it was Emma's school's aftercare number. She was there until 5 on Tuesdays, and answered. "Mr. Cole, it's Jenny from aftercare. Emma's fine. I just wanted to let you know she got into a pretty spirited argument with one of the other kids about whether electric cars are real sports cars. Mason closed his eyes briefly. Who won? Emma. Emma, pretty decisively. The other kid cried. I'll talk to her. It might be worth mentioning that decisively winning an argument with a 6-year-old isn't always the goal. It's worth mentioning, Mason said. She may not agree. He hung up. When he looked up, Scarlett Hayes was standing in the bay door. She'd come in from the waiting area at some point. She'd heard the end of that conversation. Something about her expression had changed, very slightly. Your daughter, she said. Yeah. How old? 8. She nodded slowly. There was something in her face he couldn't quite read. Complicated, layered. She opened her mouth to say something else, and then his phone rang again. The number on the screen stopped him. International, +39. Italy. He answered. The voice that came through was speaking accented English, quick and urgent. This is Marco Farina, Ferrari SPA Engineering Division. I'm calling for... Is this Mason Cole? Mason stood very still. Yeah, Mr. Cole, our remote monitoring system flagged an anomalous repair signature on a vehicle registered to Scarlett Hayes. The signature matches a specific technique developed internally about 9 years ago. We're trying to understand how this technique has been applied, because, as far as we know, the engineer who created it... A brief pause. We were told he left the industry. The silence in the bay was very complete. We were told that, Mason said carefully. Mr. Cole. Marco Farina's voice shifted, quieter, almost cautious. Is this... Are you the person who developed the CC bonding process? The composite repair protocol? Mason looked at Scarlett Hayes. She was looking back at him. Her arms were not crossed. Her face was very still. Yeah, he said into the phone. That's me. Another silence from Italy. Mr. Cole, Marco Farina said. We've been looking for you for 6 years. He finished the call. He didn't put the phone back in his pocket. He set it on the workbench beside his tools. Then he stood with his hands flat on the workbench and looked at nothing for a moment. When he turned around, Scarlett Hayes was still there. Who, she said slowly, are you? He didn't answer right away. The shop was quiet. Danny had left at 4. The Silverado was done. The street outside was empty. The fluorescent lights above hummed their thin, constant hum. Somewhere outside, a car passed on Millworks Road, and its sound faded and the silence came back. Just a mechanic, he said. She gave him a look that was mostly disbelief and partly something harder. That was Ferrari's engineering division, from Maranello. They said they've been looking for you for 6 years. They said you invented the process you just used on my car. She paused. That is not just a mechanic. He picked up his phone, put it in his pocket, began wiping down his tools with the slow, methodical care that had always been the thing he did when he needed to be doing something with his hands, so he didn't have to figure out what to do with the rest of himself. Mason. Her voice was quieter than it had been. Something had changed in it. The boardroom precision had softened slightly, not gone, but softened. You fixed something that Ferrari couldn't fix, using a technique you apparently invented, and you're... She gestured, a gesture that encompassed the bay, the shop, the burned-out R on the sign outside. Here. I like it here, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got right now. She watched him wrap the composite patch tool in its cloth cover and set it in its specific place in the cabinet. Watched him close the cabinet and latch it. The particular care of the gesture seemed to affect her. He could see it land somewhere in her face, though he couldn't say exactly where. Were you at Ferrari? She asked, quieter still. He considered. There wasn't really a reason to lie about it. The call from Maranello had removed the option anyway. Marco Farina would call again, and whatever Scarlett Hayes decided to do with the information was beyond his control. It always had been. He'd just been lucky, or careful, or both, for a long time. 8 years, he said. Left 9 years ago. Why? The fluorescence hummed. A truck moved past outside, slow and heavy. My wife died, he said. Emma was 3 months old. I came home. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. More careful. More weighted. Scarlett Hayes didn't say, I'm sorry. The way most people said it, fast and reflexive, filling the space so they didn't have to sit in it. She said nothing for a full moment, just absorbed it. He respected that more than he would have respected the words. And you've been here since, she said. Not a question. And I've been here since. She looked around the bay, at the tools, the lift, the concrete floor with its old oil stains that no amount of cleaning had entirely removed. Doing this. While Ferrari spent 6 years looking for you. They weren't looking that hard, he said. I think they assumed I was gone. Are you? Gone? He picked up the last tool, a small wrench, nothing special, and wiped it and set it down. What do you want for the car? He said. That's what you came here for. She didn't move. You're changing the subject. I'm answering the subject you came in with. Something that might have been frustration crossed her face, and then something that might have been reluctant respect followed it. She pressed her lips together. Let it go. What do I owe you? She said. $350, he said. Parts and labor. She stared at him. $350. Yes. For fixing something 3 Ferrari specialists couldn't find, and one of their master technicians from Maranello spent 2 days looking for. $350, he said again. For a moment she just looked at him. The expression on her face was complex and layered in a way he couldn't entirely decode. Something between disbelief and something older, more complicated, something that had nothing to do with the car or the price. That's insane, she said. That's what the job's worth at my labor rate. Your labor rate, she said slowly, is wrong. It's my rate, I said it. She shook her head. Not the gesture of someone disagreeing. The gesture of someone encountering something they don't know how to process. She opened her purse and took out her wallet and produced a credit card and held it out. He had a card reader, a basic one, the kind that plugged into a phone. He ran the card. She looked at the receipt on his phone screen for a moment. Then she looked up at him. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. The man on the phone, Marco Farina. He's going to call back. Probably. What are you going to tell him? Mason looked at the Ferrari, now fully repaired, sitting on his lift in his bay, in his shop on Millworks Road in Hartley, Ohio. The Rosso Corsa paint caught the fluorescent light and turned it into something richer than fluorescent light had any right to be. The truth, he said. Eventually. She picked up her purse. Which is? He lowered the lift, let the Ferrari settle onto its wheels, walked around to the driver's side and opened the door and started the engine. The sound that came out of it was clean, completely clean. The ghost frequency was gone, just the engine, all of it, unimpeded. He came back around to where she was standing and handed her the key fob. Drive it, he said. Take it on the interstate. Run it up past 4,000. See what you think. She looked at the key fob in his hand for a moment. Then she took it. That's not an answer, she said. No, he said. It's not. She was gone for 22 minutes. He swept the bay while she was out, which needed doing regardless, and then he leaned in the bay door in the November cold and waited, because it would have felt wrong to go back inside before she came back, though he couldn't have explained exactly why. The Ferrari came back down Millworks Road at 5:59 and turned into the lot and stopped. The engine idled for a moment before she cut it. She got out, stood beside the car. Her expression was the expression of someone who has just had an argument they expected to win turn against them. It's perfect, she said. Yeah, he said, whatever you did, it's completely gone. It's like a different car. Same car, he said, just running the way it was supposed to. She looked at him across the roof of the Ferrari. The light was going now. Ohio November, dark by 6, the sky the color of old pewter. Why here? She said. It came out without warning, like she hadn't decided to say it. You could be anywhere, doing anything. You have. She stopped. Started again. People spend their whole careers trying to be what you apparently just are, and you're here, with a burned-out R on your sign. My daughter goes to school 7 blocks away, he said. She absorbed that. That's it, she said. He thought about it. About the real answer, the full one. About Emma asleep in the house. About the list of things that needed fixing. About the way the shop smelled like oil and cold metal and felt, despite everything, like the only place in the world where the weight in his chest became something he could carry. That's most of it, he said. They stood in the cold, dark parking lot of Cole's Auto and Repair. The Ferrari sat between them, perfect, repaired, worth $400,000 in a lot with cracked asphalt and an old sign with a burned-out letter. The rest of it, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Really looked, the way he looked at engines. Not at the surface, but at what the surface was doing, what it was managing, what it was protecting. Some things are worth less when you make them bigger, he said. I had to figure that out the hard way. I don't want to figure it out again. She held his gaze. Something moved in her expression. Something genuine, unguarded, gone before he could name it. I'll think about that, she said. Take your time, he said. She got in the car. He watched her start it, that clean, unimpeded sound, and back out of the lot and turn onto Millworks Road and disappear. He stood in the cold for another minute. Then he went inside to close up the shop so he could go get Emma. She'd left him a voicemail at 7:12 that evening. He found it after dinner, after homework. Emma was working on a project about bridge engineering, which had led to a 40-minute digression about suspension cables that Mason had not entirely not enjoyed. After dishes, after he'd gotten Emma into bed, and come downstairs and sat in the kitchen with the last cold half cup of coffee. Mr. Cole, this is Scarlett Hayes. I wanted to say, the car is perfect. It's genuinely, I've been driving it for years and I don't think I've ever heard it sound like this. So, thank you, that's all. A pause. Actually, one more thing. I'm going to have some questions about an investment I'm considering. In the automotive sector, I'd like to get your read on it. It's not a repair job. I'd pay you for a consultation. Another pause. Shorter. I'll call your shop tomorrow. He listened to it twice. Then he set the phone face down on the counter and finished the cold coffee. Upstairs, Emma's light was still on. He could see the line of it under her door. She was reading again. She always read later than she was supposed to. And he stood outside her door for a moment and listened to the particular quality of silence that meant she was very absorbed in something. He knocked once, lightly. Lights out, Bug. A pause. The sound of a book being set down with the specific reluctance of someone not finished with it. One more chapter? It'll be there tomorrow. What if I have questions? Write them down. A longer pause. The scrape of the nightstand drawer sound. She kept a small notebook there for the questions. She'd been keeping it for 2 years. It was almost full. The light went out. He stood in the hallway for a moment in the dark. The house made its sounds. The furnace ticked. The pipes hummed their low conversation in the walls. The third floorboard creaked as he shifted his weight. He thought about Marco Farina and Maranello, about the Ferrari 296 GTB and the hairline fracture in the plenum, about Scarlett Hayes standing in his parking lot in the November dark asking him why he was here. He thought about 8 years in Italy, about the work he'd done there, the systems he'd designed, the patents with his name on them, the cars that existed in the world carrying his ideas inside their engines. I thought about the morning his wife died, the hospital, the 3-month-old he'd driven home alone. He thought about Emma writing questions in a notebook in the dark. Then he went to bed. Tomorrow the shop opened at 8. The Subaru needed finishing. There was a Porsche Cayenne coming in at 10 with a transmission complaint. Danny would make coffee that was too weak and forget to order the gasket set that Mason had asked him to order twice already. It would be, by most measurements, an ordinary day. Mason Cole had learned, at considerable cost, that ordinary days were the ones that mattered. He reached for the light. The Porsche Cayenne's transmission turned out to be worse than the owner had described, which was not a surprise. In Mason's experience, people described their car problems the way they described their health problems to doctors. Minimizing, softening, hoping that by understating the symptoms they could understate the severity and therefore the cost. The Cayenne needed a complete valve body replacement and probably a torque converter, and Mason had to call the owner twice before he reached her, and a third time after she'd had time to recover from the first call. That was Wednesday. By Friday, he'd mostly stopped thinking about the Ferrari, or he'd mostly stopped thinking about the woman who'd driven it, or he'd decided those were close enough to the same thing that he didn't need to examine the distinction. Danny had finally ordered the gasket set. He'd also, unprompted, fixed the burned-out R on the sign, which Mason noticed Thursday morning when he pulled into the lot and which Danny mentioned only when Mason mentioned it first, with the specific casualness of someone who'd done something they wanted to be noticed but didn't want to seem like they'd wanted to be noticed for. Looked bad, Danny said, not looking up from the brake rotor he was machining. It did, Mason said. Bad for business. Sure. Plus it looked bad. You said that. Well, it did. Mason let it go. He called Marco Farina back on Thursday afternoon, sitting in the small office at the back of the shop that served as filing room, break room, and the place where Mason went when he needed 3 minutes of something resembling quiet. The conversation was careful on both sides. Marco was clearly uncertain how much pressure to apply, and Mason was clearly uncertain how much he wanted to say. They talked around the center of the thing for a while, two people circling something neither wanted to name first. Eventually Marco said, "Ferrari would very much like to re-establish a working relationship, whatever form that might take." "I have a shop," Mason said. "Yes, we understand." A pause. "There are ways to structure these things. Consulting arrangements, remote work. We're not necessarily asking you to—" "I'll think about it," Mason said. "Of course." Another pause, and then Marco said something Mason hadn't expected. "The CC bonding process. We've tried to replicate it 3 times in the last 6 years. We can get close. We cannot get the same results." Mason said nothing. "You should know that," Marco said. "Whatever you decide." Mason thanked him and hung up and sat in the office for a while, listening to the sounds of the shop, Danny's impact wrench, a car on the lift, the thin cold wind coming under the back door that he kept meaning to weather strip. He thought about what Marco hadn't said, which was the part that mattered. You built something we couldn't rebuild. You left and took it with you, and we've been managing the absence ever since. He wasn't sure what to do with that. I was still not sure on Friday at 2 o'clock when Scarlett Hayes pulled into the lot, not in the Ferrari this time. A black Range Rover, current model, which meant she had at least 2 cars worth more than his mortgage, which was not a surprising discovery. She parked and came in through the waiting room door and found Danny at the front desk and asked for Mason, and Danny came back and told Mason with an expression that was very specifically neutral in the way of someone working hard not to have an expression. "The Ferrari lady," Danny said. "I got that from the Range Rover," Mason said. "She's in the waiting room." "I know where the waiting room is, Danny." She was standing when he came in, not sitting, which seemed consistent with everything he knew about her so far. The sense that sitting down was something she did by choice, and this was not a moment she'd chosen it. She was in different clothes than Tuesday, but the same category of clothes. Expensive, precise, dark. Her dark hair was back today, pulled away from her face, which made her eyes look more direct, if that was possible. "I said I'd call," she said. "You did. I'm here instead." "I noticed." She glanced at Danny, who was doing a deeply unconvincing impression of someone fascinated by the invoice on his computer screen. She looked back at Mason. "Is there somewhere?" "Yeah, come on." He took her back through the shop to the office. It was not impressive. There was a metal desk and 2 chairs and a filing cabinet with a drawer that didn't close entirely and a window that looked out at the side of the building next door. He moved a stack of parts catalogs off the second chair and gestured at it. She sat. He sat. "You're considering a purchase," he said. "Automotive sector." "Potentially." She set her bag on her lap and unclasped it and took out a folder. Actual paper, which somehow surprised him. "I've been approached about acquiring a stake in a performance parts company out of Michigan. They make components for track cars, high-performance street builds, some light racing. Good revenue, good margins. The pitch is that the market for premium aftermarket components is expanding." She set the folder on his desk. "I'm skeptical." He looked at the folder without opening it. "Skeptical why?" "Because premium markets always look healthy until they don't. And I don't know this specific market well enough to know if the health is real or if it's a good pitch." "So you want someone who knows the market?" "I want someone who knows whether what these people are building is actually good," she said. "Revenue and margins tell me the business is working. They don't tell me if the product is real." He picked up the folder, opened it. The company was called Forged Summit Performance. He'd heard of them, vaguely, the way you heard of companies in adjacent lanes, a name that surfaced occasionally in conversations at car shows or on the forums. He still checked sometimes late at night when Emma was asleep and he didn't want to do anything useful. Their flagship product was a billet aluminum intake system for track-spec Ford Coyote builds. He looked at the spec sheet. He looked at it for a while. "Their wall thickness is too conservative," he said. "On the main runner. They're leaving 10% on the table performance-wise because they're not confident enough in their machining process to push the wall thinner." She was watching him. "Is that fixable?" "Depends on their equipment. If they're still running 3-axis CNC, no. You'd need 5-axis to hold the tolerance on a thinner wall. If they've upgraded in the last 2 years..." He looked for the equipment note. Didn't find one. "I'd need to see their production line." "I can arrange that." She said it without hesitating. Like the answer to every logistical problem was simply, I can arrange that, which he supposed it probably was. Would you be willing to go to Michigan? He thought about Danny, who could manage 3 or 4 days alone probably. He thought about Emma's school schedule, no trips planned, nothing that required him specifically. He thought about the Cayenne, which would be done by next Wednesday regardless. When? He said. Next Thursday or Friday. I'd have you back by the weekend. What are you paying for the consultation? She named a number. He looked at her. That's too much, he said. Something flickered in her expression. Excuse me? For a day trip to Michigan and a walkthrough of a production line, that's too much. That is genuinely... She stopped, pressed her lips together. You are a deeply strange person. It's too much, he said again. Take the difference and put it toward the acquisition if you make it. Or don't. It's your money. Most people don't turn down money. Most people don't have everything they need, he said. It came out more plainly than he'd intended. Not as philosophy, just as fact. And he saw it land in her face. She looked at him steadily for a moment, and then she looked at the folder, which was safer. I'll adjust the rate, she said, in the tone of someone who was agreeing but not conceding. That's fine. She put the folder back in her bag. Thursday, she said. My assistant will coordinate the details. She stood. He stood. One question, he said. She looked at him. Did you drive the Ferrari today specifically so you could come here without it looking like you were coming to check on the repair? The pause was a fraction of a second, almost undetectable. The Range Rover is more practical for November, she said. Right, he said. She went back through the shop, nodding at Danny, who remembered suddenly that he was supposed to be working. Mason stood in the bay door and watched the Range Rover pull out of the lot and turn onto Millworks Road. Danny materialized at his elbow. So that's happening, he said. What's happening? Whatever that was. A business consultation, Mason said. Go finish the Cayenne. Sure, Danny said, in the tone of someone who believed none of that. He went back to the Cayenne. Mason stood in the bay door a moment longer, looking at the empty lot, at the sign with all its letters. Lit now, at the gray Ohio sky pressing down on Millworks Road. Then he went back to work. Emma found out about the Michigan trip on Sunday. She was better at getting information out of him than most adults he knew, partly because she was relentless, and partly because she asked her questions at strategic moments, in the car, at dinner, at bedtime, all the times when he was engaged in something else and his guard was adjusted. She got it out of him at dinner, between the pasta and the moment he realized he'd said more than he'd meant to. So it's like a factory visit, she said, turning her fork around in her pasta with the focus of someone handling a technical problem. It's a production facility, yeah. For what kind of parts? Intake systems, mainly, some other components. Intake systems for which platforms? He looked at her across the table. She was 8. She was looking at him with the focused interest of an engineer hearing about a project. Ford Coyote, mostly, he said. 5-liter? Yes, Emma. Their production intake is terrible, she said, with the certainty of someone who had opinions. I read about the stock runner length. It's a compromise. That's accurate, yeah. So these people are making better ones? That's what they claim. I'm going to see if it's true. She chewed pasta, thought. Who's paying you to go? A client. The Ferrari lady? He looked at her again. What Ferrari lady? Danny told me. Danny needs to learn to... He said a lady drove a Ferrari to the shop, and you fixed something nobody else could fix, and it was kind of a big deal. Emma looked at him with those eyes that were their mother's eyes, clear and direct, and absolutely certain they would get the full picture eventually. Is that true? More or less. So the Ferrari lady is a client. She's a client, yes. What's her name? Emma. What? Eat your pasta. She ate some pasta. Is she nice? The question was innocent. Of course it was innocent. She was 8, and her father had a new client, and she was curious. He knew it was innocent. He also knew, in the particular way parents develop a second sense for the real questions beneath the asked questions, that it wasn't entirely about nice or not nice. She's direct, he said. She says what she thinks. Like me? He almost smiled. A bit like you. Emma seemed to find this satisfactory. She went back to the pasta. Can I come to Michigan? No. Why? Because you have school. School is sometimes less educational than real-world experiences. That's something that sounds reasonable but isn't, he said. No. What if I wrote a report on intake system manufacturing? No, Emma. She sighed, a sigh intended to communicate that she was being reasonable and he was being obstructive, and let it go. After dinner, she helped him clear the table. She'd decided 6 months ago that helping with dishes was something engineers did because it involved systems, thinking about water pressure and temperature and efficiency, and he hadn't argued because the help was real, even if the reasoning was creative. And then she went to her notebook and wrote questions in it, which she sometimes did when she was processing something she hadn't finished with yet. He washed the dishes and thought about what it meant that his 8-year-old daughter had heard the phrase Ferrari lady, and her first question had been whether the woman was nice. He thought about it long enough that the water got cold. Scarlett Hayes ran Hayes Capital Partners out of an office in Columbus that occupied half a floor of a building downtown, which Mason gathered from the brief logistical call her assistant Patricia made Monday morning. Patricia was everything her voice had suggested in that first call. Efficient, clipped, completely unimpressed by anything that wasn't on the agenda. And she covered the Michigan trip details in under 4 minutes, which Mason respected. What Patricia did not mention, and what Mason learned from the company's basic website Wednesday evening in a check. He'd intended to be cursory and turned into 40 minutes, was that Scarlett Hayes had built Hayes Capital from nothing at the age of 23. She'd started with inherited debt, not inherited money, a fact that one profile he found mentioned in a way that seemed important, and spent 7 years turning the company into something that managed investments in 14 states. She was 30. She'd done that by 30. He closed the laptop and sat in the kitchen in the familiar dark quiet of the house, after Emma was in bed, and thought about a woman who'd built a company from a debt and drove a Ferrari and stood in his parking lot in November with the posture of someone who had never once let herself be uncertain in public. He thought about the moment in the office when she'd said, "I'd need to see their production line," and the ease of it, the absolute absence of any self-consciousness about having that kind of access, that kind of reach. She could arrange anything. She'd said so. He wondered what it cost her. He wondered why he was wondering. He went to bed. They drove to Michigan in her Range Rover. This was her suggestion, which he'd expected. Driving separately would have been logistically complicated, and she was not a person who complicated things when she didn't need to. He met her in a parking lot off Route 40 at 7 Thursday morning, where the Range Rover was already idling and she was in the driver's seat with a coffee from somewhere that wasn't a gas station. She handed him one when he got in. He accepted it without making anything of it, which he could see was the right response. She drove the way she did most things, with precise, economical attention. No wasted movement. She was 3 or 4 miles per hour over the limit, in a way that felt like a professional judgment rather than impatience. He noticed she checked her mirrors more than most drivers and tracked the cars around her with a low-level monitoring that suggested she'd trained herself to be aware of her surroundings at a level just above default. They talked, and then they didn't talk, and then they talked again. And he noticed that she was someone who was comfortable with the gaps. That was rarer than it should have been. She asked him about the Ferrari consultation at Maranello. Not intrusively, the way someone asks about a country they've never been to and are genuinely curious about, not trying to get something, just interested. He told her some of it. The project he'd worked on there, a prototype powertrain program that had eventually become the basis for the hybrid system in the current 296 generation. The team, which was small and worked with the particular intensity of people who knew what they were building, mattered. The way the engineering culture was different there, slower in some ways, more patient, less interested in quarterly deliverables, and more interested in whether the thing worked right. "You miss it," she said. It wasn't a question exactly, more an observation. "Parts of it," he said. "Which parts?" He thought about it honestly, which was different from the reflexive answer. "The problems," he said. "The specific kind of problem you get when you're trying to push something past what's been done before. There's a quality of attention required. You can't half-think it. Everything you've got has to be on it." "You get that at the shop," she said. "Sometimes. Not the same scale." "Scale matters to you?" "It matters to the problem. The problem is different at scale. It's denser maybe, more dimensions." He looked out at the highway. Though sometimes simpler problems are harder. A hairline fracture in a plenum is a simpler problem than a prototype powertrain, but 3 Ferrari specialists missed it. That's not nothing. "No," she said. "It's not." A mile or two passed. "What happened with your wife?" she said. She said it carefully, the same way she'd received the information in the shop, without rushing toward it or away from it. He looked at the road. "Her name was Clara," he said. "She was a structural engineer. We met in Turin. She was there on a project for an Italian firm. We were together for 2 years before Emma came." He paused. "She died in a car accident. Nothing. There was nothing dramatic about it. A driver ran a light. She was crossing the street. Emma was 3 months old. Scarlett said nothing. She didn't reach for the right words because she apparently knew there weren't any, and he was grateful for that more than he could have explained. "And you came home," she said eventually. "And I came home. Ohio. Born here. Grew up here. My dad ran the shop before me. He retired to Florida a few years back. I reopened the building and..." He shrugged. "Started over." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think you did the right thing?" The question surprised him. Not because it was wrong to ask, but because it was so direct. No softening around it. No hedging. Just the real question. "I think I did the necessary thing," he said. Whether it was the right thing. He looked out the window at the flat gray Ohio countryside moving past. "Ask me in 10 years. She absorbed that. "You know what I think?" "Go ahead." "I think people who do the necessary thing and the right thing and tell themselves they're different are usually being careful with themselves. Not wrong, just careful." He looked at her. She was watching the road. "That might be true," he said. "It usually is." They were quiet again. Outside, the landscape began shifting as they crossed into Michigan. Still flat, still gray, the particular muted palette of the upper Midwest in November. He drank his coffee. She drove. "Why did you start the company?" he said. She glanced at him. "Hayes Capital?" "Yeah." "My father's business failed when I was 18, she said, flat, factual. "We owed more than we had and more than we'd ever have if we just worked. So I figured out how to not just work." She paused. "That's the short version. What's the long version?" "The long version involves 5 years of sleeping 4 hours a night and 2 investors who tried to take the company before it was worth taking, which meant it was worth something, so I held on." She took a sip of her coffee. "And 1 business partner who turned out to be stealing from the company, which I found out about 18 months in." "What did you do?" "I called his lawyer before he knew I knew," she said. "Structured an exit that protected the company and cost him everything he'd stolen. By the time he understood what had happened, it was done." She said it without satisfaction and without bitterness, just as the sequence of events it had been. "I was 24. Mason looked at her, 30 years old and already carrying a history that most people twice her age hadn't accumulated. "Is that why you're careful about investments?" he said. "That's why I don't trust pitches," she said. "People can pitch anything. You have to see the product, the actual product, the thing with its imperfections. Like intake runners with conservative wall thickness. Exactly like that. Forged Summit Performance occupied a building in a light industrial park outside Dearborn, and it was better than Mason had expected and worse than their pitch materials had suggested, which was approximately the honest description of most things. The facility was clean, the equipment was current enough to be capable, and the 2 engineers who walked them through the production process clearly knew what they were doing. But the wall thickness issue was real. He could see it in the spec sheets and confirmed it at the inspection table. And there were 2 other things he noted while walking the line. Smaller things, details of process that suggested the company was still in a phase where consistency was a goal rather than a default. He told Scarlett all of it in the parking lot after, standing by the Range Rover in the wind. "So?" she said. "The product is real," he said. "The pitch overstates the ceiling by about 20%. The equipment can support improvement, but only with process discipline they haven't fully developed." He thought about it. "In 3 years, maybe 4, they could be exactly what they're pitching. Right now, they're 80% of it." "Is 80% worth the valuation?" "Depends on what you think those 3 or 4 years cost." She was quiet, looking at the building. Not at him, at the building, the actual facility, processing what she'd seen. "If you were me," she said, "would you buy in?" "At the current valuation, no. If you can negotiate 15% off the ask and include performance milestones in the structure, then maybe. Depends on management." The CEO was impressive. "The CEO knows how to talk to investors," he said. "I don't know if she knows how to run the floor." Those are different skills. Scarlett turned that over. Fair point. They got in the Range Rover. She sat for a moment before she started it, hands on the wheel, not driving yet. This was useful, she said. Good. I want to do it again. If you're... She seemed to find the phrasing complicated. If there are other opportunities where your read on the technical side would be valuable, consult for you mean? On a case-by-case basis, you keep the shop. I'm not asking for exclusivity. He considered it. What kind of opportunities? Automotive, primarily. Some adjacent manufacturing. I'm looking at a composite materials company in Pittsburgh next month. She glanced at him. I could use someone who can tell me if what they're making is as good as they say it is. It was a reasonable arrangement, clean, professional. He didn't know what else it was. Send me the details when you have them, he said. I'll let you know. She started the Range Rover. They pulled out of the industrial park and onto the highway heading south and east, and the city folded away behind them into the flat gray distance. They stopped for lunch at a diner somewhere between Detroit and Toledo because she said she was hungry, and the word hungry from a woman who managed everything with that kind of control seemed specific and true and worth stopping for. The diner was the real kind, not retro designed to look real, actually real, with the particular smell of hash browns and old coffee and the floor adhesive that no amount of mopping ever fully removed. She ordered coffee and a cheeseburger, which he'd somehow not expected. He didn't know what he'd expected. She looked at him, noticing. What? She said. Nothing. You expected a salad. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. She picked up her menu, looked at it, set it down. I was on a 16-hour workday yesterday. I want a cheeseburger. Sounds right, he said. What are you getting? Same. The food came. They ate without the performance of not eating, which he also appreciated. She ate the burger the way you eat when you're genuinely hungry, not how you eat when you're eating in front of someone you want to impress. Can I ask you something? He said. Go ahead. The Ferrari. When you drove it back, you said it was perfect. She looked at him, chewing, waited. You've driven Ferraris for how long? I bought my first one at 26, she said. 4 years. And you know what they're supposed to sound like. Better than the people at the dealerships, probably. Then you knew, he said. When you drove it before you brought it to me, you knew it wasn't right. She set down the burger, looked at him steadily. Yes, she said. And 3 specialists told you it was fine. 2 of them told me it was within normal operating parameters, she said. One told me it might be a characteristic of the specific build, and I should adjust my expectations. But you didn't adjust your expectations. No. Because you knew what you knew, he said. Even when people with more official credentials told you you were wrong. Something moved in her expression, complicated, slightly guarded. What's your point? No point, he said. Just, that's not nothing either. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she picked up her burger. It's annoying, she said, when someone notices something you weren't advertising. Sorry. No, you're not. Not really. No, he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but close. The immediate predecessor to a laugh. It was the first time he'd heard anything close to it from her. They finished the food, split the check over a brief, efficient disagreement that she won by handing her card to the server before he could object. And he let it go because he recognized a losing position and life was too short to make everything a battle. On the road again, the light was going the way it went in November, early and without ceremony, the sky pressing down toward the horizon. He watched it. Your daughter, Scarlett said, about 20 minutes from the Ohio state line. Emma, she knows a lot about cars. More than a lot, he said. You teach her? Some. She reads mostly. She'll read anything. I found a fluid dynamics textbook in her backpack last month. She'd checked it out from the library. 3rd grade and reading fluid dynamics. She wanted to understand turbulence. A pause. Why? She'd read something about downforce and wanted to know why the air behaved differently over different surfaces, and the book she had didn't go deep enough. He looked at his hands. So she found one that did. Scarlett was quiet for a moment. What does she want to be? An engineer, he said. Specifically, he almost didn't say it and then said it anyway. She wants to design race cars. Another pause. That's very specific, Scarlett said. Yeah, she's very specific. A mile. She sounds like someone worth knowing, Scarlett said. He looked at her. She was watching the road. She is, he said. Yeah. They crossed into Ohio at dusk, the state line marked by a green sign catching the last of the light, and the countryside on the other side looked the same as the countryside on the Michigan side, because geography didn't care about the lines people drew on maps. She dropped him at his car in the lot off Route 40 at 6:42. He got out, and she lowered the passenger window. Pittsburgh will be mid-December, she said. Patricia will be in touch. Okay, he said. Mason. He stopped with his hand on the car door. The thing you said at lunch, she said, about knowing what you know even when people tell you you're wrong. She looked at him through the lowered window in the November dark. That works in both directions. When someone's wrong to be where they are, and when they're right to be there. He wasn't entirely sure what she meant, or he was, and wasn't ready to have the conversation it opened. Drive safe, he said. She raised the window. He got in his car and sat for a moment watching the Range Rover turn out of the lot and disappear onto Route 40 heading east toward Columbus, and then he called Emma. She picked up on the second ring because she always picked up on the second ring. How was Michigan? She said. Cold. What was the facility like? Tell you at dinner. Did you eat already? Mrs. Patterson ordered pizza. What kind? Pepperoni. But I picked them off. Because I wanted cheese pizza and you weren't there to say no. He put the car in reverse. Fair enough, he said. I'll be home in 40 minutes. Okay. A pause. Dad? Yeah. Did you see the Ferrari lady? He pulled out of the lot onto the road, the headlights cutting into the dark. She was the client, he said. Yeah. Is she nice? He thought about a woman who ordered a cheeseburger when she was hungry and let a mechanic from Ohio tell her things she didn't want to hear and drove with her mirrors checked and said, I can arrange that the way other people said I'll try. She's real, he said. I'll tell you the difference another time. Emma accepted this with the patience of someone filing information for later retrieval. 40 minutes, she said. 40 minutes, he said. He drove home on the dark Ohio roads, the fields on either side invisible in the November night, the occasional farmhouse light marking the distance. The heater ran and the radio was off, and the road was mostly his. Marco Farina had sent an email while he was in Michigan. He'd seen the notification, hadn't opened it. It would be there when he got home. The Cayenne would be done by Monday. Danny had texted about a BMW 5 Series that had called for an appointment next week. The shop would open at 8 tomorrow. The sign now said Cole's Auto and Repair with all its letters working. Emma had eaten cheese pizza and was 40 minutes away. It was, Mason thought, a full enough life. Though something had shifted in it in the last week that he couldn't quite account for, something that hadn't been there before and didn't have a name yet, and he let that fact sit in the car with him on the dark road without trying to figure out what it was. Some things needed time. He'd learned that much. Marco Farina's email was 4 paragraphs long and had taken someone considerable care to write. Mason could tell by the density of it, the way each sentence carried exactly as much as it needed to and no more, the way the ask was buried in the 3rd paragraph rather than the 1st, which was the mark of someone who understood that the question mattered less than the approach to the question. The email arrived on a Thursday. He read it Friday morning at 5:40, standing at the kitchen window with his coffee while Emma was still asleep, the house around him making its usual sounds. He read it twice. Then he set his phone face down on the counter and watched the sky go from black to gray and thought about it. What Marco was proposing was not, on paper, dramatic. A formal consulting arrangement, remote, flexible, no relocation required. Ferrari would send technical files for review. Mason would provide analysis and recommendations. If certain projects required his direct involvement, they would discuss it case by case. The company would compensate him at a rate that Marco had listed in the 4th paragraph with the specific precision of a number that had been approved by people above Marco's pay grade. The number was significant. Mason drank his coffee and thought about the 9 years since he'd left Maranello and the particular shape his life had taken since. And he thought about what saying yes to this would change and what it wouldn't. And by the time Emma came downstairs in the Ohio State sweatshirt with her hair flattened, he hadn't decided anything except that he wasn't going to decide anything today. You're thinking, Emma said, climbing onto her bar stool. I'm standing, he said. You do both at the same time. Your face is different when you're thinking. She reached for the orange juice he'd already poured. What about? Work stuff. The Ferrari people? He looked at her. Danny mentioned they called, she said. Danny, Mason said, has a very large mouth for someone who works for me. He's friendly. She drank her juice. Are you going to work for them again? I don't know yet. What are you worried about? The question landed cleanly, the way her questions often did, without preamble, without the social padding adults put around things. 8 years old, and she asked things straight. He thought about how to answer honestly without dumping the full weight of it on her. I built something there, he said, something I was proud of, and I left it. Going back changes the story of why I left. Emma thought about this with the seriousness she brought to mechanical problems. Does the story matter if the work is good? He looked at her. I mean, she pushed her juice glass around on the counter. The thing you built is still a good thing, right? Whether you stayed or left. Yeah, he said, it is. So the story is just what happened, not who you are. He stood there in the cold kitchen in the gray Ohio morning and looked at his 8-year-old daughter, who had her mother's eyes and apparently had also inherited something from somewhere else that he couldn't account for. Eat your eggs, he said. I'm right, though, she said. Eat your eggs, Emma. She ate her eggs, and she was right, and he knew it, and that didn't make it simpler. So he called Marco Farina that afternoon from the office at the back of the shop, with the door closed and Danny on the other side of it pretending not to know the call was happening. He told Marco he was interested in the arrangement in principle and that he had conditions. Marco said, of course. Mason said he kept the shop. Full stop. No negotiation. The shop ran as it always had. He was not a Ferrari employee. He was a contractor with a separate business, and Ferrari's work fit around the shop's schedule, not the other way around. Any project that required his physical presence at Maranello required a minimum of 3 weeks' notice. He did not do press. He did not do interviews. His name did not appear in company communications without his specific approval for each instance. Marco was quiet for a moment after each condition, not the silence of someone stalling, but the silence of someone relaying information to a room he hadn't told Mason existed, which meant this wasn't just a call with Marco. One more thing, Mason said. Yes? If I find a problem in your engineering and I tell you it's a problem, I need to know that gets heard, not filtered, not managed, heard. A longer pause. Then Marco said, that's actually why we want you, Mr. Cole. We already have people who tell us what we want to hear. Mason accepted that. He said he'd have his response in writing by end of week. Marco said that was fine. They hung up. He sat in the office for a while. The filing cabinet drawer that didn't close all the way was open 2 inches, the way it always was, and a corner of a folder stuck out of it at a familiar angle. He'd looked at that 2 inches of open drawer for 4 years without fixing it. He thought about that. Then he pulled the drawer open all the way, found the piece of plastic that had broken from the rail, and spent 7 minutes fixing it with a screwdriver and a part he found in the desk drawer that he'd apparently been keeping for this exact purpose without ever getting around to using it. The drawer closed cleanly. He didn't know what that meant, if it meant anything. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe some things just needed to be fixed when they were ready to be fixed. He opened the door and went back to work. The first Ferrari files arrived on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the call with Marco. A 68-megabyte folder that appeared in the secure portal Marco had set up, technical documentation for a prototype hybrid system they were calling internally the V6HY3, which was a derivative of the architecture Mason himself had helped design a decade ago, now pushed into a configuration that was considerably more aggressive than anything he'd worked on. He opened the files at 9:30 at night when Emma was in bed, sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop and the last of the coffee, and within 10 minutes he'd forgotten about the coffee. The engineering was extraordinary. He could see the decade of development accumulated in it. 9 years of iteration by a team that had taken the foundation he'd helped lay and built something higher on it than he would have thought possible from where they'd started. But there were things. He could see the things, the places where the ambition of the design had outrun the caution of the execution, where decisions had been made under pressure that would have been made differently with more time. He started a document. Notes, questions, not corrections. He was careful about that, about the distinction between this is wrong and I'm asking about this, but detailed, specific, honest. He wrote for 2 hours, stopped when his back told him he'd been sitting too long, read through what he'd written, cut a quarter of it that was either redundant or phrasing he didn't like, and sent it to Marco's portal at 11:47. Marco called the next morning at 6, which was noon in Maranello. "We've been sitting with this for 2 hours," Marco said. He sounded like a man who'd been awake since before noon. "The note on the intercooler efficiency mapping. It's a threshold problem," Mason said. He was at the kitchen window again, coffee in hand, Emma asleep. "The mapping assumes a linear response in the upper range, but the data in Section 4 doesn't support that. You've got a nonlinear fall-off starting at about 87% load that the current map doesn't account for. Our modeling showed—" "Your modeling is based on the previous hardware configuration," Mason said. "The new compressor geometry changes the response curve. Section 4 has the raw data that shows it if you look at the column J values on pages 12 through 15. Silence. The sound of paper, or maybe scrolling. "Madonna," Marco said quietly, to someone in the room with him. Not to Mason. "It's fixable," Mason said. "The mapping needs to be recalibrated against the actual compressor data. I can put together a recommended approach if that's useful." "Please," Marco said, in the tone of someone who had just found a crack in a foundation they thought was solid. Mason said he'd send it by end of day. He did. Danny ran the shop that day mostly alone, which he managed with the competence he always had when no one was watching him, and Mason sat in the back office with the door closed and worked on Ferrari's intercooler problem, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. The particular quality of engagement that came from a problem that required everything. He also thought about what Marco had said on the phone, the word he'd said to the room in Italian that Mason had understood because 9 years in Italy left marks on a person whether they meant it to or not. Not just the language, the way the engineering culture lived in the body, the particular serious joy of working on something that mattered, the feeling of being in a room full of people who cared. He'd walked away from that. He'd had to. I wasn't entirely sure what it meant that he was walking back, however partially. Scarlett came to the shop on a Thursday in early December, unannounced. Not for the Ferrari. She'd driven it twice since the repair, and texted once to say it was still perfect. In the terse way she communicated things that didn't require elaboration. This time she came in the Range Rover and came through the waiting room door in the middle of the afternoon with 2 cups of coffee from the place downtown and found Mason under a Corvette on the second lift. "I'm in the neighborhood," she said, which they both understood was not really the reason. He slid out from under the car and sat up, looked at her. She held out a coffee. "From that place on 5th, she said, "Upstate. Patricia told me you said once the shop coffee was terrible." "I said that to Danny." "Danny told Patricia." "Danny," Mason said, accepting the coffee, "is a significant liability." "He seems to genuinely like you," she said. "That's what he does. Tells people things you said that made him like you." He didn't know what to do with that, so he drank the coffee, which was genuinely better than the shop coffee, and stood up. "What's in the neighborhood?" he said. "I drove through Hartley specifically," she said. "I'm between meetings and Columbus is 40 minutes that direction." She gestured vaguely east. "I wanted to see how the Ferrari project was going." "The consulting?" "Yes." He studied her for a moment. She looked the same as always, precise, composed, the particular controlled energy of someone who managed everything at a level just below visible effort. But there was something slightly different about her standing in his shop voluntarily in the middle of a Thursday, holding a coffee from downtown and calling it in the neighborhood. "It's going," he said. "I sent them a note on an intercooler mapping issue. They're rebuilding the efficiency map now." "They took your note seriously." "Yes." "How does that feel?" He thought about it. "Complicated," he said. She nodded, as though complicated was the correct answer and she'd expected it. Danny came through from the first bay, saw Scarlett, and achieved an expression of exaggerated surprise that fooled no one. "Oh, hey, Ms. Hayes. I didn't know you were stopping by." "I was in the neighborhood," she said. "Sure," Danny said in the exact tone he'd used weeks ago when he said sure to Mason about the business consultation. He found something to do at the front desk and removed himself from the conversation while remaining entirely present to it. "Pittsburgh is next week," Scarlett said to Mason. "The composite materials company. I wanted to confirm you're still available." "I said I would be." "I know, I wanted to confirm." She drank her coffee. "I also wanted to—" She stopped. Started again, which was unusual for her. She didn't usually stop. "There's a dinner the night before the facility visit. The company's CEO and a few of his team. He wants to have dinner with potential investors, which is standard. I normally go to these alone." A pause. I'd like you to come. He looked at her. As the technical consultant, she said, it would be useful to have someone there who can listen to how the CEO talks about the engineering and tell me if what he's saying is real. You need me to spot the bullshit. I need you to spot the bullshit, she confirmed, without any apparent discomfort about the bluntness. That's legitimate, he said. It is, she said. Okay, he said. I'll come. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Relaxed, maybe, by a degree so small it was barely visible. Good, Patricia will send the details. He nodded. She looked around the shop, at the Corvette on the lift, at Danny at the desk, at the concrete floor and the tool cabinet and the coffee maker that was held together with electrical tape, and that she apparently knew about because Danny had told Patricia at some point in what was becoming a secondary channel of communication between their respective worlds. The Ferrari files, she said. The consulting. Are you okay with it? The question surprised him. Not the words, but the intention behind them. The specific care in it, the way it was asking about him rather than about the arrangement. I think so, he said. It's a different thing than it was. I'm different than I was. He looked at his coffee. That helps? Different how? He thought about it. I used to need it to be the whole thing, he said. The work, the scale, being part of something that big. I needed it the way some people need to be seen. I thought that was just how I was built. He paused. Turns out I was wrong about that. What changed? Emma, he said simply. And then, losing Clara. And then, 9 years of getting up at 5:14 and making eggs and fixing cars. That changes things. She looked at him for a moment with that expression he'd started to recognize. The one that meant she was receiving something she hadn't expected and was deciding what to do with it. You make it sound peaceful, she said. The 9 years. Parts of it were, he said. Parts of it were just hard. Which parts? He looked at her. She held the look. Nights, mostly, he said. The first couple years. Emma was a baby, and I didn't know what I was doing. My mother came and stayed for 6 months, which helped, and was also its own thing. After she left, he shook his head. It was just us. Me and a kid who couldn't talk yet, and a shop that was barely breaking even in a house that needed everything. How did you get through it? One day, he said. Just one day at a time, which sounds like a thing people say, but it's actually literally how it works. You just get through today, and then tomorrow's today. She was quiet. Something in her face was different from the boardroom version of her. Softer at the edges, less armored. He'd seen it before, in flashes, in the Michigan diner and in the parking lot in November dark. It appeared sometimes, and then she gathered it back. I run a company, she said. I have for 7 years. And sometimes I look at what you're describing and I think... She stopped. I think I missed something. Choosing this instead of that. I don't know what I missed. I just think sometimes I did. It was the most unguarded thing she'd said to him yet. He could tell it cost her. You're 30, he said. That's not really... I'm just saying, you're 30. You haven't missed anything that's gone. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked at her coffee. Detroit, she said, changing direction without flagging the change. The Forge Summit deal. I offered 20% below their ask with milestone provisions. They came back at 12% below with modified milestones. She glanced up. I walked. He waited. The CEO's a good pitcher, she said. But you were right. She didn't know her floor. When I pushed on the process timeline, she gave me estimates that didn't match what we saw on the production line. She either didn't know or she was rounding up. She paused. Either way. Good call, he said. It was your read. It was your decision. She almost smiled. The predecessor to a smile thing again. Is this how you operate? Refuse credit? I'm a mechanic, he said. I diagnose. You decide. That's a very clean division. It works for me. Danny, at the desk, coughed once in the way of someone reminding a room he existed. Scarlett glanced over at him and then back at Mason with the faintest expression of someone who found something privately funny. I should go, she said. Pittsburgh, he said. Patricia has my number. She does. She turned toward the door and then stopped, half turned back. Your daughter, Emma. Does she know much about composite materials? He stared at her. Why? Curiosity. But there was something deliberate about the question. She's read about carbon fiber manufacturing, he said slowly. She's 8. I know she's 8. Scarlett turned fully back. I found something. A program. For kids interested in engineering. It's through Ohio State summer session, week-long intensive. Aerospace and automotive track. She said it carefully, measuring the words. I sit on the advisory board. I can send the information if you want it, for her to look at. He looked at her. I'm not trying to... She paused. I'm not overstepping. If it's not something you want, ignore it. It's fine, he said. Send it. She nodded. Once, decisive, like the matter was filed. Then she went through the waiting room and out the door, and he heard the Range Rover start and pull away. Danny was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. So that's definitely... Danny. I'm just saying, Danny. The Corvette needs its front sway bar links done by 5. Danny went back to the Corvette. Mason stood in the bay and finished his coffee, which was still warm, and looked at the empty parking lot, and did not examine whatever he was thinking too closely, because some things needed to be true for a while before you looked at them. The Pittsburgh dinner was at a restaurant that cost more per plate than Mason's daily labor rate, which he registered and then set aside as information that was relevant to where he was, but not to why he was there. The Composite Materials CEO was a man named Brant Ellison, mid-50s, silver-haired, with the easy authority of someone who'd been the smartest person in a lot of rooms and had learned to carry it without announcing it. He was, Mason thought within 10 minutes, genuinely smart and genuinely knowledgeable, and also genuinely selective about what he said and what he didn't say. There were 4 people at the table. Brant, his VP of engineering, a quiet woman named Dr. Ji-Yeon Park, who said less than anyone else and noticed more, Scarlett and Mason. They talked through 2 courses about the market, the technology, the company's trajectory. Brant was impressive. His grasp of the composites landscape was real, not pitched, actually real, the kind of knowledge that came from 20 years in a field rather than from briefing documents prepared for a dinner. Mason listened and ate his steak, which was very good, and said almost nothing. Scarlett watched him not say anything. He could feel her watching. Over the 3rd course, Brant said something about their proprietary resin infusion process, a specific claim about cycle time reduction that was the technical cornerstone of their valuation pitch, and Mason looked up from his plate. What's your void content at that cycle time? He said. A small pause. Dr. Park looked up from her food for the first time since the appetizers. Brant said, Our testing shows it's within spec. What spec? Mason said. Your spec or the application spec for the platforms you're targeting? Another pause. Brant's expression didn't change. He was good enough that it didn't. But something shifted in the room, a degree of temperature. Our process is validated across our primary application range, Brant said. That's not quite an answer, Mason said, not unkindly. Scarlett said nothing. She was watching Brant. Dr. Park set down her fork. Our void content at the accelerated cycle is 1.8%, she said. Her voice was measured, precise, and entirely unbothered by her CEO's pause. The application spec for the aerospace-adjacent work is 1.5. We're currently outside that window. Silence. Brant looked at Ji-Yeon Park with an expression that was not quite anger and not quite surprise and somewhere in between. We're in a development phase on the cycle time, Ji-Yeon said to the table rather than to Brant. The accelerated process is not yet qualified for the aerospace-adjacent applications. For the automotive applications, she looked at Mason. The threshold is more permissive and we're within it. What's the timeline on getting the aerospace process qualified? Mason said. 18 to 24 months, she said, with adequate capital. Thank you, Mason said, and went back to his steak. The dinner continued. Brant recovered with the smoothness of someone who'd navigated rough water before and understood that the way out was forward, not back. He talked about the development roadmap, the investment they'd already made, the strength of the automotive applications in the near term. He was persuasive. He was also, Mason thought, more honest for the next 40 minutes than he'd been for the first 40, which was an improvement. In the car afterward, Scarlett's Range Rover again, Pittsburgh streets wet from earlier rain. She was quiet for 2 blocks before she said anything. The VP, she said, Ji-Yeon Park. Yeah, she's the one who actually knows the business. She's the one who knows the technical reality, he said. Brant knows the business. Those are different things, and they both matter. Is the void content problem fatal? For the aerospace pitch, yes. For the automotive pitch, no. Jian was right. The threshold is more permissive for automotive, and they're within it. He looked out the rain-blurred window. The valuation assumes aerospace adjacency, though, which they can't honestly claim yet. So the valuation's inflated. The valuation assumes a capability they're developing, not one they have. She drove. The rain had started again, light, the wipers going in their slow, measured arc. I'm going to want to talk to Ji-Yeon Park separately, Scarlett said, without Brant. That'll be politically complicated. I know. She changed lanes with the unhurried precision that characterized everything she did behind the wheel. Can I ask you something honestly? Sure. In there. When you asked about the void content. She glanced at him. Did you already know the answer? He thought about whether to be honest. I had a strong suspicion, he said. Based on the cycle time they claimed, the physics suggested the numbers didn't work. So you asked anyway. I needed to hear how he answered, he said, not what the number was. How he answered. She absorbed this. And how did he answer? He didn't, Mason said. Ji-Yeon did. Scarlett nodded slowly. That's the most important thing that happened at that dinner. Yeah, he said. It is. She drove in the rain and he watched the Pittsburgh streets and thought about the dynamic he'd seen at the table. The CEO with his polished presentation and the engineer with her precise, unbothered truth, and the moment when the two had diverged and the room had had to decide which one to follow. He thought about all the rooms he'd been in over the years where that same dynamic played out, and how the outcome depended almost entirely on whether the people with the money had the patience to wait for the engineer to speak. Scarlett, he thought, had that patience. She might not always look like it, but she had it. Ji-Yeon Park might be worth more to you than the company, he said. Scarlett looked at him. I mean, if the acquisition doesn't work out, she knows what she knows. That has value independent of Brant's pitch. Are you suggesting I poach his VP? I'm suggesting she's a person worth knowing, he said. What you do with that is your business. She looked forward again, slight curve at the corner of her mouth. You're better at this than you think. I'm a mechanic, he said. I just notice things. That's what good investors do, she said. Notice things. He didn't argue with her. Outside, Pittsburgh moved past in the rain, bridges and lights and the wet black river, and the particular beauty of an industrial city at night, all that functional ugliness turned by darkness and water into something almost graceful. They got to the hotel, and she pulled up in front. He got out. Leaned back in through the door. The Ohio State program, he said. For Emma. She read the materials Patricia sent. Scarlett looked at him from behind the wheel. She wants to apply, he said. She made a list of reasons it was a good opportunity and presented them to me at dinner on Thursday, with a diagram. Something genuine crossed Scarlett's face then. Not the almost smile, the actual thing, brief and warm and entirely unguarded. What kind of diagram, she said. A cost-benefit analysis, he said. On graph paper. She used a ruler. Scarlett laughed. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. And it was real. Not performed, not managed, just real, surprised out of her by the image of an 8-year-old with a ruler and graph paper making the case for her own education. Tell her I said the diagram was a good touch, Scarlett said. It absolutely worked, he said. She was still smiling when he closed the door. He stood on the sidewalk in the light Pittsburgh rain and watched the Range Rover pull away from the curb and disappear into the traffic. The hotel lobby was warm. He checked in and rode the elevator up to the 4th floor and stood at the window looking out at the river and the bridges, and thought about Ji-Yeon Park, with her precise voice and her unbothered truth, and about Brant Ellison, who'd spent a dinner managing a story rather than telling it, and about the very specific courage required to say the number that complicates everything when it would be so much easier to let someone else say it or not say it at all. He thought about Emma and the graph paper and the ruler. He called her before bed. She was still awake, reading, always reading, and she picked up immediately. How was the dinner? She said. Interesting, he said. The VP of engineering was the most honest person at the table. Is that unusual? Sometimes. A pause. Did Ms. Hayes make a decision? Not yet. She's smart, Emma said. She'll make the right one. He looked at the river through the hotel window. How do you know she's smart? Because she hired you, Emma said, with the complete simplicity of someone who considered this self-evident. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed in the Pittsburgh dark. "Go to sleep, Bug," he said. "I'm reading." "Go to sleep. One more chapter." "Emma." A pause. The sound of a book closing, with, he noted, less reluctance than usual. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah." "Do you like her, Miss Hayes?" I was quiet for a moment. The river outside was doing what rivers do, moving, indifferent, old. "She's good at what she does," he said, "and she asks real questions." "That's not what I asked." "Good night, Emma." She made a sound that communicated she had catalogued the non-answer and would return to it. "Good night," she said. He sat on the bed for a while after they hung up. The room was the generic comfortable of hotel rooms everywhere, clean, functional, designed to offend no one. He'd slept in rooms like this in Italy during the Ferrari years, traveling for tests and presentations, and the occasional press event he'd been dragged to against his better judgment. He'd been a different person in those rooms, or the same person in a different chapter. Emma thought the chapters were separate. Stories were just what happened, not who you were. Maybe she was right. He lay back on the hotel bed with his clothes on and looked at the ceiling and didn't sleep for a while, which was fine. The ceiling had nothing to tell him, but it was neutral, and neutral was sometimes what a person needed. Outside, Pittsburgh kept moving in the rain, and somewhere across the city, Scarlett Hayes was probably not sleeping either, working through numbers in her head with the particular insomnia of someone who cared too much about getting things right to turn her brain off when the lights went out. He thought about that. Then he thought about Ji-yeon Park saying 1.8% without hesitation, without apology, without looking at her CEO first. Then he stopped thinking and let the sound of the rain do its slow work on the edges of whatever was keeping him awake. He drove back from Pittsburgh alone the next morning, Scarlett having left at 6 for a 7:30 call she'd taken in the hotel lobby, with the focused efficiency of someone who didn't waste the hour between waking up and the world needing things from her. They'd said goodbye in the elevator, her going down to the lobby, him going back up for his bag. And she'd said Patricia will send the wrap-up notes, and he'd said fine, and the doors had closed between them, and that was that. He thought about the dinner on the drive back, about Brant Ellison and Ji-yeon Park, and the specific moment when the room had shifted. He thought about what Scarlett would do with it, the careful negotiation she'd run, the questions she'd ask Ji-yeon Park, in whatever separate conversation she arranged, the way she'd take the complicated truth of what that company was and figure out what it was worth at what price. He thought about Emma's graph paper cost-benefit analysis. He thought about Emma in general, which was where his thinking usually ended up, given enough road and enough quiet. He stopped for gas in Zanesville and stood in the cold outside the car and looked at his phone. Marco had sent a file update overnight, the intercooler efficiency map revision, completed by the Maranello team based on Mason's recommendation, with a note that said preliminary testing shows 12% improvement in upper range response. Team is asking whether you can review the revised mapping before we proceed to validation. The tone of the note was different from the early correspondence. Less formal, more direct, the way engineers write to other engineers once the hierarchy of a thing has been established and everyone knows where they stand. He wrote back that he'd look at it that evening. He got back in the car and drove. The thing about Ohio in December was that it was honest about itself. No pretense of beauty, no snow yet to cover the dead fields, just brown and gray and the particular flatness of the landscape stripped of everything that made it photogenic. He'd grown up in this landscape and then spent 9 years in Italy, which was relentlessly beautiful in the way of places that have been beautiful so long they've accepted it as a condition of existence. And when he'd come back to Ohio, he'd had to relearn the language of it. The way beauty here was functional, not decorative. A bare oak standing alone in a winter field. The geometry of a grain elevator against a flat sky. Nothing showing off. He'd come to prefer it. He got home at 11:15, 2 hours before he needed to pick up Emma, and stood in the kitchen and ate a sandwich and looked at the backyard where the stubborn oak had finally finished dropping its leaves sometime in the past 2 days. The yard looked more itself without them. Just the tree and the dead grass and the fence that still needed painting, everything reduced to its basic structure. He'd been avoiding the fence for 4 years. I went to the garage and found the paint. He painted for an hour and a half in the December cold, which was not comfortable but was productive, and by the time he needed to leave for school, he'd finished 2 panels, and his hands were stiff, and there was a thin line of white paint along his right forearm where the brush had slipped, and he felt, obscurely, better than he had in some days. Emma came out through the school doors and saw him and came across the sidewalk at the particular pace she used when she was trying not to look like she was hurrying, which meant she was hurrying. "How was Pittsburgh?" she said, climbing into the car. "Useful." "What was the facility like?" "Good bones," he said. "Some honest problems." "Did Ms. Hayes decide?" "Not yet." Emma buckled her seatbelt with the focused authority of someone performing a safety procedure correctly. "She'll figure it out," she said. She seems like someone who figures things out." "Yeah," he said, "she does." He pulled out of the school lot and headed home, and Emma talked about her day. A disagreement with her math teacher about whether her approach to a problem was wrong or just unconventional. She was convinced it was unconventional. Mason suspected she was right, but told her to use the teacher's method anyway, which she found professionally unsatisfying. And the new library book she'd found about wind tunnel testing, and a question she'd been working on about whether the underbody aerodynamics principles she'd read about months ago applied differently at low speed versus high speed. He answered the question. She argued with his answer. He revised the answer. She found that more satisfying. This was how they worked, and it was one of the things he was most certain about in his life. That this particular exchange, this specific quality of argument and revision, was something he would not trade for the intercooler efficiency map, or the Pittsburgh dinner, or the number Marco had put in that fourth paragraph of the email, or anything else that existed in the world of things that were impressive. The letter arrived on a Monday. It came in a flat white envelope with an Italian postmark and the Ferrari prancing horse on the upper left corner, and Mason found it in the mailbox that morning between a water bill and a grocery store circular. He brought it inside and set it on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a while before opening it. It was not from Marco. It was from the office of Luca Ferrante, Ferrari's chief technical officer, a name Mason recognized because Ferrante had been a young team leader when Mason was there, sharp and driven, someone who'd risen quickly because he was the kind of engineer who solved problems instead of documenting them. The letter was formal, but not cold. It thanked Mason for the consulting work and the intercooler revision, which it described as having materially improved the projected performance envelope of the V6HY3 program. It said that Ferrari was preparing to present the prototype at a closed technical preview for select media and investors in March. It said that the company would be honored if Mason would attend, not as a service provider, as a contributor to the program. There was a handwritten note at the bottom, in Ferrante's own hand, which Mason recognized from years of meeting notes and whiteboard equations. Mason, we've been building on your foundation for 9 years. It would mean something to have you in the room. L. He stood in the kitchen with the letter and thought about the last time he'd been in a room with the people he used to be in rooms with. 9 years ago. The hospital. 3 months old. The particular specific grief of a life interrupted in the middle of its most ambitious chapter. He thought about Emma's graph paper analysis with the ruler, about Scarlett's almost laugh becoming a real laugh over the hotel pickup in the rain, about the fence that was half painted now, white against the December gray. He put the letter on the counter and called Marco. "The letter from Ferrante," he said when Marco picked up. "Yes." Marco's voice was careful. "March," Mason said. "That's 3 months." "Correct." "It's a closed preview, press and investors, and program contributors," Marco said. "Which you are." "I don't do press." "We understand this would not be a press-facing role. Your presence would be acknowledged to the internal audience, to the team." A pause. "Luca wanted me to tell you that the team knows whose foundation they've been building on. Even the engineers who came after you. They've worked with your designs for years." Mason sat down. He hadn't meant to sit down. He'd been standing, leaning against the counter, but his legs apparently decided the conversation required a chair. "I'll think about it," he said. "Of course," Marco said. "There's time." After he hung up, he sat at the kitchen table and thought about March and Maranello, and the particular feeling of being somewhere you once were and coming back different, and whether that was a good feeling or a hard one, or whether it was both, and you just had to carry both. He thought about Emma, who would need someone while he was gone. His mother in Florida, maybe. Or Mrs. Patterson next door who'd watched Emma before and was reliable in the straightforward way of neighbors who showed up. I thought about the fact that he was already planning the logistics, which was different from still deciding. He put the letter in the kitchen drawer where he kept things he wasn't ready to file or throw away. Well, 2 days later, Scarlett called. Not texted, called at 7 in the evening, which was unusual enough that he looked at the number twice before answering. I need your read on something, she said. No preamble. Okay. I've had a preliminary conversation with Ji-yeon Park. Separately, as I planned. She's... A pause. She's remarkable. She knows every number in that company, and she's not protecting any of them. She told me things Brandt definitely did not want her to tell me. Like what? Like that the accelerated cycle process has had 3 validation failures in the last 8 months. The void content issue isn't a development problem. It's a recurring problem that they've been working around rather than solving. Mason absorbed this. That's different from what she said at dinner. At dinner, she answered what you asked. Tonight, she told me what I needed to know. Scarlett's voice had the clipped intensity of someone who'd spent the last few hours sitting with information that changed a picture. The company's automotive applications are real, and the margins are real, but the aerospace adjacency, which is the core of the valuation, is at minimum 18 months away and possibly never. So Brandt's been pitching future capability as present capability. Selectively, she said. He hasn't lied outright. He's just curated the story. Are you going to do? That's what I'm calling you about. He went to the back door and looked out at the yard, the half-painted fence visible in the dim light from the kitchen window. Walk me through the options, he said. Option 1? Walk away. The valuation's wrong and the risk is higher than presented. Clean exit. What's the loss? Time. I've spent 6 weeks on this. That's all? That's all, she said, without self-pity about the 6 weeks. Option 2. I go back to Brandt with what I know and renegotiate. Force a valuation that reflects actual present capability, not projected future capability. That means coming in significantly lower than his ask. He'll know Ji-yeon talked to you. Yes. How does he handle that? I don't know, she said. That's a variable I can't fully predict, which is the part I want your read on. Mason thought about Brandt Ellison at the dinner table. The smooth recovery after Ji-yeon's number had landed, the way he'd continued through the rest of the meal with the practiced ease of someone who knew that information alone didn't determine outcomes. He's not a bad person, Mason said. He believes in the company. He's been overselling the ceiling because he needs the capital, and he's convinced the ceiling is real, even if the timeline isn't. When Ji-yeon corrected him at dinner, he didn't try to walk it back. He adjusted. That adjusting, is it character or strategy? Could be both, he said. Usually is, in people who are good at what they do. If I come back with a lower number and I tell him I know about the validation failures, does he fold or does he fight? Mason thought about it, really thought, the way he thought about an engine he couldn't quite hear yet. Systematically, with patience, ruling things out. He folds, he said, but he'll negotiate. He won't just take whatever you offer. He needs the deal, and he knows you know his ceiling. He'll work to find the floor you can both live with. What about Ji-yeon? What about her? If I do this deal, and I'm right about Brandt, if his strength is the pitch, and hers is the execution, do I have a company that actually works? That depends on whether Brandt is smart enough to know what he has in her. He knows, Scarlett said. At dinner, after she said the number, he looked at her, just for a second. It wasn't anger, it was something like respect he wasn't planning to show. Mason nodded to himself. That matched what he'd seen. Then yeah, he said. If you get the valuation right and the milestone provisions are real, you probably have a company that works. A silence. Not uncomfortable. The working kind. Okay, she said. Okay, you're doing it? Okay, I'm going to sleep on it, she said. But yes, probably. Another pause, shorter. You're useful. You keep saying that, he said, because it keeps being true. A beat. How was Pittsburgh? The drive back? The question surprised him. The shift from business to the personal question embedded in the ordinary one. Fine, he said. Painted the fence when I got home. The fence? Needed painting, he said. 4 years. He could hear something in her silence that might have been the predecessor to a comment she decided against making. I got a letter, he said. He hadn't planned to tell her. It came out anyway. From Ferrari. From their chief technical officer. They want me to come to Maranello in March. A closed preview for the prototype. The V6 HY3. Yeah. Are you going? I don't know yet. A pause. What's making you uncertain? He thought about how to answer. The last time I was in that world, I was a different person, he said. I left because I had to. Going back, even for one event, even changed, it changes the story of why I left. What it meant. You said something like that before, she said, about the consulting. Yeah. And you started consulting anyway. Yeah, he said. So you already know the answer to this one. I was quiet. Outside, the yard was dark, the fence half white and half bare in the winter night. Emma would say the story is just what happened, he said, not who you are. Emma is right, Scarlett said. Emma is going to be a terrifying adult. I'm aware, he said. She almost laughed again. He was starting to be able to hear the shape of it before it arrived, the slight change in the quality of her voice that meant something genuine was coming. Mason, she said. Yeah, go to Italy, she said. Take Emma to school, make your eggs, open the shop, do whatever you need to do, and then go to Italy. Because you built something real, and it's still there, and you're allowed to stand in the same room with it. He didn't say anything. You're allowed to have done something extraordinary and not spend the rest of your life being modest about it in a garage, she said. And there was something in her voice, not harsh but firm, the firmness of someone saying a true thing to someone who needs to hear it and has been not hearing it for a while. You're allowed to be both things. The father who makes the eggs and the engineer who built the foundation, those aren't in competition. The kitchen was quiet. The furnace ticked. Upstairs he could hear the faint sound of Emma still awake. The creak of her bed, the rustle of a book. You sound very certain about that, he said. I am, she said. How? A pause. Because I've been both things simultaneously since I was 23, and it's hard and it's worth it, she said. The only time it's not worth it is when you let one of them pretend the other doesn't exist. He sat with that. I'll think about Italy, he said. You've already decided, she said. He probably had. Christmas arrived in the way Christmas arrived in Hartley, Ohio, without much drama, but with a specific quality of cold and light that changed the character of the town slightly. Made it look like a different place for a few weeks, the kind of place that meant something to someone once. Mason put lights on the house because Emma asked him to, and then Emma decided the lights needed to be repositioned and spent an hour directing him from the yard while he was on a ladder in the December wind. The result was not symmetrical. Emma declared it authentically asymmetric, which he chose to accept. Danny closed the shop for the week between Christmas and New Year. Mason had never done that before. Usually he stayed open through the holidays, picking up the business from people whose cars broke down at inconvenient times, which was all times. But Danny made the argument that they'd had a good year and a week wouldn't hurt, and he was going to see his family in Texas, and he said this in the tone of someone making a reasonable request, while also daring Mason to say no. Mason said fine. He spent the week doing the things the house had been waiting for. The gutters he'd been meaning to clear since October, the bathroom faucet that had been dripping since August, the third floorboard outside Emma's room that he'd been stepping over for years without fixing because he'd come to think of the creak as a feature rather than a defect. He fixed the floorboard, then stood outside Emma's door at 11 that night and realized the hallway was completely silent when he shifted his weight and felt the absence of the familiar sound like a small loss. Emma noticed it the next morning. The floor's different, she said. Fixed it. She looked at the floor, then at him. I liked the creak. I know, he said. I did too. She accepted this as the complicated thing it was and went to breakfast. Scarlett texted on Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas. Tell Emma the diagram method works in most professional settings. She should keep it. He showed Emma, who read it twice and said, She's funny, with the particular approval of someone who'd reached a verdict. He wrote back. She says thank you. Merry Christmas. And then, after a moment, Emma's application to the Ohio State program is in. She submitted it herself. She made me proofread it, but wouldn't let me change anything. 3 minutes later, of course she did. She'll get in. He didn't write back to that. He didn't know what he'd write. He put the phone in his pocket and went to finish helping Emma construct what she'd described as a scale aerodynamic model and what currently looked like a collection of cardboard and tape that had ambitions. New Year's came and went quietly. Emma was in bed by 9 because she was 8 and had school in 4 days, and Mason sat in the kitchen with a glass of whiskey. He didn't entirely finish and looked at the kitchen drawer where Ferrante's letter was, which he'd moved 3 times without throwing it away or filing it anywhere more permanent. He opened the drawer, took out the letter, read it again. Then he went to his laptop and opened Marco's portal and wrote an email that said, "Marco, I'll attend the March preview. Please advise on logistics. Also, I'd like to bring my daughter. She's 8. She wants to be an engineer. I'd appreciate it if someone could show her around the facility." He sent it before he thought about it too long. Marco replied in 40 minutes. It was morning in Italy. With 2 lines. "We'll arrange everything. Luca will be very glad to hear it. And your daughter is welcome anywhere in this building." Mason closed the laptop. The kitchen was quiet. The year outside was new and identical to the year before in every way that mattered, and different in every way that didn't yet have a name. He finished the whiskey. January moved the way. January moved, slowly, gray, with the specific duration of a month that lasted longer than its days. The shop was busy in the way it was always busy after the holidays. People returning to their lives and finding their cars had spent 2 weeks sitting in the cold and had opinions about it. Danny came back from Texas with a sunburn and renewed energy and a story about his grandmother's tamales that he told in installments over 3 days. The Ferrari work continued. Marco sent files twice a week now, and Mason's responses had become something the Maranello team had apparently started building around. He could see it in the structure of the questions, the way they'd begun anticipating his concerns by flagging their own uncertainties before he had to ask. It was a specific kind of professional trust that took time to develop and meant something once it was there. Scarlett came to the shop 3 more times in January. The first time was ostensibly about a possible new investment, a small electric vehicle startup in Cincinnati that needed a technical read. The second time she brought lunch and the investment conversation lasted 20 minutes, and the rest of the time they talked about nothing in particular, which was different, which both of them noticed and neither of them addressed. The third time she arrived without any stated reason at all and stood in the waiting room and said, "I was driving by," and he said, "Columbus is 40 minutes that direction." And she said, "I know where Columbus is," and he let her in. That third time, Emma was there. She'd had a half day at school, and Mason hadn't been able to get a hold of Mrs. Patterson, and she'd spent the afternoon at the shop, which she occasionally did, set up at the corner of the workbench with her library books and her notebook, ignoring the shop noise with the equanimity of someone who'd been doing it since she was old enough to sit up. When Scarlett came in, Emma looked up from her book. They looked at each other for a moment. The 30-year-old CEO and the 8-year-old with the flattened hair and the Ohio State sweatshirt. And Mason stood between them and said, "Emma, this is Ms. Hayes." "I know," Emma said. "You told me about her." "Hello, Emma," Scarlett said. "Hi." Emma looked at her with the directness she brought to everything. "Dad said you're direct." "He said that?" "He said you say what you think." Emma closed her book with one finger, marking her place. "I think that's a good quality." Something shifted in Scarlett's expression. The unguarded thing. The genuine one. "Thank you. I've heard you do the same." "Usually," Emma said. "Sometimes I'm strategic about it." Scarlett glanced at Mason. He shrugged slightly because there was nothing to add. "What are you reading?" Scarlett said, moving toward the workbench, toward Emma. Emma held up the book. Introduction to Computational Fluid Dynamics, which was deeply not an 8-year-old book, and which Emma had apparently sweet-talked out of the high school library somehow. "It's about simulating airflow," Emma said. "Instead of building a wind tunnel for every design, you can model it computationally. It's more efficient, but you have to know the real physics first, or the model doesn't mean anything." "Garbage in, garbage out," Scarlett said. Emma pointed at her. Exactly. Dad said that's true for investments, too." Scarlett turned to Mason with an expression that was amused and slightly something else. "You've been teaching her investment theory?" "She extrapolates," he said. "Aggressively," Scarlett said, still looking at Emma with something that Mason could not entirely identify. Warmth, yes, but something more specific than warmth, something that looked almost like recognition. Emma watched Scarlett with her mother's clear eyes. "Did you like engineering school?" "I studied finance," Scarlett said. Emma considered this. "Why?" "Because I needed to understand how money worked, and there wasn't a school for the specific thing I wanted to do, so I chose the closest thing." "Do you wish you'd studied engineering?" "Sometimes," Scarlett said. Though I think I'd have been mediocre at it. I'm better at seeing the value of what other people build than I am at building things myself. That's still important, Emma said seriously. If nobody knows how to see value, good work doesn't get resources. Scarlett looked at this child for a moment. Then she looked at Mason. She's right, Scarlett said. She usually is, he said. It's a problem sometimes, Emma said. People think I'm being difficult, but I'm just being right, and those feel different from the inside. I'm familiar with that problem, Scarlett said. Something happened then. A connection made, a frequency matched. And Mason watched it happen between this woman and his daughter, and felt something in his chest that he didn't have a comfortable name for, something that wasn't grief and wasn't quite joy and wasn't quite hope, but contained parts of all three. Emma showed Scarlett the fluid dynamics diagram she'd been drawing in her notebook. Scarlett looked at them seriously, asking real questions, not the simplified questions adults ask children to make them feel smart, but actual questions, the kind that assumed the child could answer them. Emma answered them. Scarlett pushed back on one answer, a point about boundary layer separation, and Emma thought about it and revised her answer, and Scarlett said, "Better?" And Emma looked like someone who'd been given something she needed. Mason made coffee, the bad shop coffee, because he hadn't been expecting guests, and brought it to Scarlett, and she drank it without complaint, which he noted. They stayed in the shop until 5 when Danny's shift ended. He left with a wave, and then it was just the three of them in the quiet of the bay, the fluorescent lights doing their thin hum, the coffee maker sputtering its last, the winter dark pressing up against the garage door. "Italy," Emma said suddenly, out of nowhere, the way she did when something she'd been processing reached a conclusion. "What about it?" Mason said. "I've been reading about Maranello, where Ferrari is." She looked at Scarlett. "Did you know Dad used to work there?" "I did," Scarlett said. "He built something important there," Emma said. "He doesn't talk about it very much, but I found one of his old research papers in a box in the basement." Mason looked at her. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said. "The box wasn't labeled," she said, with the complete absence of guilt of someone who felt their actions were entirely justified. The paper was about composite repair methodology and intake system design, and there were photos. She looked at him steadily. "You were young." "I was 22 when I started that work," he said. "You looked happy," Emma said. The bay was very quiet. Scarlett was looking at the floor. "I was," Mason said. "Mostly." "You look happy now too," Emma said. "Different kind, but still." He looked at his daughter in the bad fluorescent light of the shop he'd built from what was left after everything, and thought about how the thing you spent the most time building was sometimes invisible to you because you were so close to it. "Yeah," he said. "Different kind." Emma nodded, satisfied, and picked up her CFD book again. Scarlett looked up from the floor and found Mason looking at her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "She found the research papers," Scarlett said quietly. "Apparently." "Are you upset?" He thought about it. "No," he said. "Not really." She looked at him. "Good," she said, quiet, certain. The heater in the bay clicked on and ran its warm noise across the silence between them. Outside, Millworks Road was empty in the January dark. Inside, his daughter was reading about the physics of air, and the woman across the bay was looking at him like she was figuring out the distance between where they were and somewhere she hadn't named yet. And Mason Cole stood in his shop in his town with his cracked concrete and his good tools and his sign with all its letters working, and felt something he hadn't felt in 9 years. Rearrange itself inside his chest into a shape he recognized but didn't have words for yet. I didn't push it, didn't name it, just let it be what it was. Some things needed time. He knew that better than most. February arrived with ice. Real ice. The kind that got under the snow and made every surface treacherous. The kind that snapped branches and brought down power lines and kept people home in a way that Ohio winters occasionally insisted on. The shop ran on a reduced schedule for 3 days when the roads were genuinely dangerous, and Mason spent those days in the house with Emma, who treated the snow days as an opportunity to advance her research, and made the kitchen table into a temporary engineering workspace that involved rulers, graph paper, the CFD book, and 3 different colored pens with a system he couldn't entirely decode. He worked on the Ferrari files during Emma's study hours. The V6HY3 was coming together. He could see it in the progression of the data, the way the numbers had cleaned up since the intercooler revision. The way the team's questions had shifted from "why isn't this working" to "how do we make this better," which was a different kind of problem and a better one. On the second snow day, while Emma was deep in something involving a protractor, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, Columbus area code. "Mr. Cole?" A man's voice, slightly formal, slightly too careful. "My name is David Rourke. I'm a journalist with the Ohio Business Journal. I've been doing a piece on Scarlett Hayes and Hayes Capital Partners, and in the course of my research, your name has come up in relation to her recent consulting arrangements. I was hoping to—" "No," Mason said. A pause. "I'm sorry? I don't do interviews," he said. "I'm not going to be part of your piece. Have a good day." He hung up. He sat for a moment, then he called Scarlett. She picked up on the first ring. "David Rourke," she said before he could say anything. "You knew." "Patricia told me he'd been making calls. I was going to call you today. I'm sorry he got to you first." "It's fine." I said no and hung up. A beat. "Just like that?" "Yeah." He heard something in her voice. Relief, maybe, and something adjacent to it. "Some people would have talked," she said. "Even people who didn't mean to. He's good at the slow pull." "I don't have anything to say," he said. "I fix cars. I consult sometimes. Neither of those is a story." She was quiet for a moment. "He might write something anyway. Use what he's already found." "What has he found?" "The Ferrari call, probably. Someone at the Hartley Business Registry knows you renewed the shop's license the same month you started the Ferrari arrangement. It's not hard to connect." She paused. "He knows about Pittsburgh. He knows I've been to your shop." Mason thought about that. About what a story built from those facts would look like, and who it would describe, and what it would simplify in the describing. "Will it cause a problem for you?" he said. "The piece. Journalists write about me regularly," she said. "I've made peace with it." "That's not what I asked." A pause. "If he writes that I've been consulting with a former Ferrari engineer who runs a small shop in Hartley, Ohio, that's accurate and not damaging," she said carefully. "If he writes something that implies—" She stopped. "Other things. That could be more complicated. For you professionally." "For both of us, potentially," she said, "depending on what he implies." He sat in the kitchen with Emma across the table, head bent over her graph paper, oblivious. "What do you want to do?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "I want to let it land however it lands and deal with it if it's a problem." "Okay," he said. "You don't have to be okay with it." "I don't have a reputation in the journalism sense," he said. "He can write what he finds. I fix what's broken, and I raise my kid. That's the whole story." She was quiet for longer than usual. "Mason," she said. "Yeah. I think I need to tell you something." She said it carefully, like someone approaching something they've been circling for a while. Emma looked up from her graph paper. She could apparently hear something in the quality of her father's attention that had changed. She looked at him with those clear eyes, and then, with the specific thoughtfulness of a child who understood more than she was supposed to, she picked up her book and her colored pens and her graph paper and said, "I'm going to work upstairs." "You don't have to," he started. "I want more light," she said, which was not true because the kitchen light was perfectly adequate, and she carried her things out of the kitchen and up the stairs, and the third floorboard didn't creak anymore in the hallway, and the house was quiet. "I keep coming to your shop," Scarlett said, through the phone. "I know," he said, "not for business reasons." "I know that too," he said. A silence, longer than the working kind. "That might be a problem," she said. "For clarity, for the professional arrangement." "It might," he said. "I'm not good at—" She stopped, started again. "I'm usually very clear about what I want and what I'm doing and why. This is the first time in a long time that I haven't been clear." He thought about the November parking lot, about the Pittsburgh rain, about Emma with her fluid dynamics book, asking Scarlett why she'd studied finance, about Scarlett saying she'll get in and meaning it as certainty, not encouragement. "I'm not clear either," he said. "I haven't been for a while." She exhaled, just barely, just enough to hear. "Okay," she said, quiet. "Okay, that's... okay." "Yeah," he said. He looked at the kitchen, at the table where Emma had been sitting, at the drawer that held Ferrante's letter, closed now, flush with the cabinet face. "Italy is in 6 weeks," he said. "I know. Emma's coming with me." I know that too, she said. You told me. A pause that might have been either of them figuring out what the next thing was, or might have been both of them deciding the next thing didn't need to be forced yet. Come to dinner, he said. Next week. I'll cook. Emma will interrogate you about boundary layer separation, and you can push back on her answers again. A pause. You cook? Adequately, he said. Eggs specifically. She made the sound that was the predecessor to the laugh. Then the laugh came. Real, brief, warm. And he sat in his kitchen in the February ice listening to it and thought that there were certain sounds a person could carry for a long time. Next week, she said. What night? Tuesday, he said. 6 o'clock. I'll be there, she said. After they hung up, he sat alone in the kitchen with the ice outside and the quiet house around him, and the drawer with the letter in it, and the table where Emma had been sitting, and all the accumulated ordinary weight of a life that had been rebuilt from hard things and was still being built and would keep being built, which was not the same as being finished. He thought about what finished would even look like. He thought it probably didn't look like anything in particular. It just looked like this. The dinner on Tuesday was not a disaster, which Mason had considered a reasonable success threshold given the variables involved. Prima pasta, not because it was impressive, but because it was the thing he actually knew how to make well. The bolognese he'd learned from a neighbor in Turin who'd been 73 years old and had very specific opinions about the ratio of pork to beef and the amount of time the sauce needed and the criminality of rushing it. Emma had set the table with a precision that suggested she'd thought about it, including finding a candle somewhere in the house that Mason didn't know existed and positioning it at the center of the table with the authority of someone executing a design plan. He'd told Emma not to make it weird. Emma had said she didn't know what that meant, which was either true or a very effective performance of true, and he decided not to investigate which. Scarlett arrived at 6:03, which felt like a deliberate decision, early enough to be punctual, late enough to not seem like she'd been watching the clock. She brought wine and a small thing wrapped in paper that turned out to be a book about aerospace engineering written for young readers that was nonetheless not condescending, which Emma unwrapped and looked at, and then looked at Scarlett with the specific expression she reserved for things that were exactly right. How did you know this one? Emma said. I asked a librarian, Scarlett said. Emma looked at the book again. It's the good edition, the one with the updated appendix. That's what the librarian said. Emma looked at her father, then back at Scarlett. Okay, she said, which from Emma was a complete acceptance. They ate at the kitchen table, the three of them, with the candle Emma had found burning in the center and the February dark outside the window, and the bolognese that had needed 2 hours of not rushing, and was, Mason privately thought, the best he'd made in several years. Scarlett ate the way she'd eaten the cheeseburger in the Michigan diner, genuinely, without performance, and said it was very good, which he believed because she wasn't someone who said things she didn't mean about things that didn't matter. Emma talked. She talked about the Ohio State program, which she'd been accepted to. The letter had arrived the previous Thursday, and she'd been holding a controlled excitement about it ever since in the way of someone who felt deeply but had opinions about when feelings were appropriate to display. She talked about the CFD book and the boundary layer problem she'd revised her answer to and the new question the revision had opened. She talked about Italy. I've been reading about the Fiorano circuit, she said. That's Ferrari's test track. It's on the same property as the factory. I know, Mason said. Do you think they'll let us see it? I asked Marco to arrange a facility tour. Emma processed this. The whole facility? Within reason. She looked at the candle with the focused expression of someone running calculations. Do you think they test on it during March? Probably not the prototype, Mason said. Too early in the development cycle. But maybe other cars? Maybe. Emma appeared to accept this as sufficient. She looked at Scarlett. Have you been to Italy? Twice, Scarlett said. Rome and once to Milan for a conference. Not the north? Not where Ferrari is? Not yet, Scarlett said. The words landed in the air between the adults with a specific quality that Emma either didn't notice or noticed and filed away. And Mason looked at his pasta and decided not to examine it at the table. After dinner, Emma helped clear the system's thinking about water pressure and temperature. And then she said she needed to do reading before bed and took her aerospace book and disappeared upstairs, which Mason had not asked her to do and which she had apparently decided on her own. And he was not going to think too hard about the calculation his 8-year-old had made, because some things were better accepted than analyzed. He and Scarlett sat at the kitchen table with the candle and the wine in the quiet house. "She's remarkable," Scarlett said. "Yeah. I don't say that about most people." "I know." He drank his wine. "She likes you." "How can you tell?" "She used the candle," he said. "She only finds the candle for things she wants to be special." Scarlett looked at the candle. Something moved across her face, the unguarded thing, the one she kept collecting back. "Mason," she said. "Yeah." She looked at him. "What are we doing?" He thought about how to be honest without being careless with the honesty. "I think we're figuring that out," he said. "We've been figuring it out for 4 months. Some things take longer than others." She looked at her wine glass, turned the stem between her fingers in the habit he'd noticed before, something she did when she was organizing her thoughts against what she wanted to say. "I don't have a—" She stopped. "My life is in Columbus. My company is in Columbus. I built that company out of nothing, and it requires me in a specific way that I can't just relocate or restructure." She looked up. "I'm not saying that as a wall. I'm saying it as a fact, because I think you deserve the facts." "I know that," he said. "Emma's school is here. The shop is here. My life is built here." "So we have a geography problem." "We have a geography problem," he said. Columbus is 40 minutes. She looked at him steadily. "That's not nothing." "No," he said. "It's not nothing. It's also not nothing that you've driven 40 minutes to sit in my shop waiting area 3 times in the last month." She held his gaze. "I noticed you noticed that." "I notice most things," he said. The candle between them burned its small light. Outside, the February ice was doing what ice did, holding everything still, preserving the cold, waiting for March. "I'm not easy," she said. It came out flat and honest, not self-pitying and not apologetic, just factual. "I work too much. I have high standards that are sometimes, I've been told they're unreasonable. I don't always know how to stop moving long enough to let things be what they are." "You stopped tonight," he said. She looked at the table. "Yes." "You stopped in Pittsburgh, in the diner." "The cheeseburger moment," she said quietly. "The cheeseburger moment," he said. You stopped in November in the parking lot in the dark." "I keep stopping around you," she said. Not like a complaint, like someone reporting a phenomenon they hadn't fully accounted for. He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not easy either," he said. "I have a daughter who is my whole life, and she'll always come first. I have a shop I'm not going to give up. I carry things from 9 years ago that I've dealt with but don't fully disappear. And He paused. "I have spent a long time building a life that's small on purpose, because small felt safe, and I'm still learning that small and safe aren't the same thing." She looked at him, really looked, the way she'd looked at the Ferrari before she decided to trust it, with the specific attention of someone who needed to know what was real before they put their weight on it. "We could try," she said. "The geography and the complicated and all of it. We could just try." "Yeah," he said, "we could." "That's not very romantic," she said. "No," he said, "it's honest." She smiled. The full one, not the predecessor, not the almost, the real thing, and it changed her face into something that was warmer and less armored and more true than the version of herself she usually let the world see. He'd been waiting for that smile since November without knowing he was waiting for it. "Okay," she said. "Honest is fine. Honest is better." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Not dramatic, just there. Just his hand on hers, in the candlelight in the kitchen that needed the countertop replacing and the ceiling repainted and had a coffee maker held together with electrical tape, and was, despite all of that, exactly where he wanted to be. She turned her hand over under his. Upstairs, the floorboard that no longer creaked was silent, and Emma was reading her aerospace book, and the house held all of them the way old houses hold the weight of the people who live in them, imperfectly, solidly, without complaint. The David Rourke piece ran on a Thursday in the first week of March, 2 weeks before Italy. Mason read it on his phone over coffee at 5:43 in the morning, before Emma was awake. It was longer than he'd expected and better written than he'd feared, which turned out to be its own kind of problem. Rourke had done his work. He'd found the Ferrari patents with Mason's name on them, which were public record, which Mason had never hidden, just never advertised. He'd talked to Richard Vance, who had apparently been more forthcoming than Mason would have preferred. though what Richard said was genuinely kind and also genuinely factual. He'd talked to someone from the Hartley Business Registry and someone from a Ferrari industry forum online and someone who'd worked adjacent to Mason's program in Maranello and remembered him. The piece described Mason as a former Ferrari powertrain engineer who'd walked away from the industry after a personal tragedy and built a small repair shop in rural Ohio, who'd recently re-engaged with Ferrari in a consulting capacity, and who had been linked, the word Rourke used was linked, careful enough to be technically defensible, to CEO Scarlett Hayes' investment consulting operations. It was accurate. It was also, Mason recognized, with the specific discomfort of being seen clearly without being asked, more than he'd intended anyone to know. The angle Rourke had found, which he'd assembled from the public facts with the particular talent of someone who knew that two true things placed beside each other created a third thing. Neither of them said outright, was essentially this. A man of extraordinary ability had hidden himself in obscurity for nearly a decade, and a powerful woman had found him, and now the world was catching up. It was not wrong. It was also not the story Mason would have told about himself. He called Scarlett at 6:15. "I've read it," she said, before he spoke. Patricia has been awake since 5, she said. "I've been awake since 5:30. "It's accurate," he said. "It's accurate," she said. "It's also..." He could hear her deciding how to say it. "It's going to get attention. The Ferrari angle, the hiding in Ohio angle. People are going to find the shop." "I know." "Are you okay with that?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "But I'm not okay with it either. It is what it is." "I'm sorry," she said. If the connection to me made this more visible than it would have been." "You didn't ask Rourke to write it," he said. "And you didn't hide what you were doing. Neither did I." Mason, Scarlett. He said her name the way he said Emma's name when he wanted her to stop apologizing for something that didn't require apology. "It's fine, really." A pause. He could hear her breathing, the particular quality of someone settling themselves. "The Ferrari preview is in 12 days, she said. "I know." "The piece is going to make that more complicated, more visible. Probably." "Are you still going?" He thought about the drawer, about Ferrante's handwritten note at the bottom of the letter, about Emma with her fluid dynamics book, and her library research and the aerodynamic model made of cardboard and tape that currently sat on her dresser. "Yes," he said. "We're still going." She exhaled. "Good," she said. He meant to hang up and then didn't. "Scarlett." "Yeah." "The piece. The linked language." "I noticed it." "Does it cause a problem for you? With investors or the company?" "No," she said, firm and fast, the way she said things she'd already thought through completely. "My investors care about returns. My company cares about results. What I do personally is mine." A pause. "And I'm not going to manage my life around what looks appropriate to people who aren't in it." He thought about that. About the specific cost of that statement for someone in her position, the deliberate choice to not perform a version of herself that was easier for other people. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. After they hung up, he sat in the kitchen until Emma came downstairs. He didn't show her the article. She was 8. It had nothing to do with her, and she'd find out about it eventually when she was old enough for it to mean less, and that was fine. She climbed onto her bar stool and wrapped both hands around her orange juice. "You're thinking again," she said. "Standing," he said. "Both," she said. He scrambled the eggs. The Rourke piece did what Scarlett had predicted. By Friday of that week, 3 calls had come into the shop from collectors Mason didn't know. One from Georgia, one from California, one from somewhere in Texas, who'd read the piece and had cars and wanted work done. Danny handled the calls with the professional calm of someone who'd been waiting for this and had mentally prepared his response, which was to take names and numbers and tell them Mason would be in touch, which Danny relayed with a satisfaction he didn't bother to disguise. "We're going to need a longer wait list," Danny said. "We're going to need to not let a magazine article change how we run the shop," Mason said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Danny said, which was, Mason had to admit, correct. One call was different from the others. It came directly to Mason's cell, not the shop line, from a number he didn't recognize, and the voice on the other end was a man named Carl Whitmore, who represented a private equity group that was looking at creating what he called a boutique ultra-high-performance restoration and engineering house, and wanted Mason to consider leading the technical side. The compensation he described was not a number Mason had been offered before. The structure would involve Mason's name, Mason's methods, a team built around him, facilities built to his specification. Everything he'd turned down for 9 years, offered again with more money and a better pitch. He listened to Carl Whitmore for 4 minutes. Carl Whitmore was articulate and clearly prepared and had done his research. He'd read the patents. He understood what Mason had built at Ferrari. He used phrases like generational talent and legacy operation without any apparent awareness of how those words sounded to the person they were aimed at. "Thank you," Mason said when Carl finished. "I'm not interested." A pause. "Mr. Cole, I don't think you understand the scale of what—" "I understand the scale," Mason said. "I'm not interested." "Can I ask why?" He looked through the office window at the shop, at Danny under the BMW, at the Corvette waiting on the second lift, at the coffee maker with the electrical tape. "I already have what I want," he said. "I don't need more of something I've already got enough of." Carl Whitmore tried twice more with different framings, and then accepted the answer with the professionalism of someone who knew when a no was final. After Mason hung up, he sat for a moment. Then he opened the office door and went back to work. Danny looked up from the BMW. "Another offer?" "Yes." "Big?" "Yes." Danny looked at him. "You said no." "Yes." Danny went back to the BMW. "One day," he said to the undercarriage, "you're going to have to explain your financial philosophy to me." "My financial philosophy," Mason said, picking up his wrench, "is that money is what you use to build a life. It's not the life itself." Danny thought about this. "That's either very wise or very convenient." "Probably both," Mason said. They flew to Italy on a Wednesday, out of Columbus, connecting through Frankfurt. Emma had a window seat and kept her face turned to the glass for most of the transatlantic crossing, watching the ocean below with the focused attention of someone cataloging information. She'd brought 3 books and her notebook and the colored pens and had not slept for more than an hour, which Mason had predicted and accepted. At some point over the Atlantic, when the cabin was dark and most people were sleeping, Emma turned from the window and looked at him. "Dad." "Yeah." "When we're there, at Ferrari." She turned her pen over in her fingers. "Are you nervous?" He thought about it. "A little," he said. "Yeah." "Because of the people you used to know?" "Because of who I used to be around those people," he said. "It's different." Emma thought about this with the seriousness she brought to real problems. "You're still the same person who did the work," she said. "I know." "The work didn't disappear when you left." "No," he said. "It didn't." "So you're just adding to the picture," she said, "not replacing it." He looked at his daughter in the dim cabin light, at the book stacked on her tray table and the pen turning in her fingers, and the clear eyes that were her mother's eyes, and saw things clearly without flinching from what they saw. "Ah, yeah," he said, adding to it. She nodded, satisfied. Then she turned back to the window, though there was nothing to see now but black. "I've been thinking," she said, still looking at the dark. "About what?" "About what I want to build," she said, "when I'm older. The kind of engineering I want to do." She paused. "I don't want to build things that only rich people can have. Like, the Ferrari stuff is incredible engineering and I want to understand all of it. But I want to understand it so I can apply the principles to things that actually help people." He sat very still. "Lightweight structures," she said. "Efficient powertrains, aerodynamic design, all of that. You can use it in emergency vehicles, public transit, agricultural equipment, things that matter for people who aren't buying $400,000 cars." She said it without drama, just as the direction she'd been thinking in, just as the thing she'd figured out. "That's a good idea, Emma," he said. "I know," she said. "I've been thinking about it for a while." He looked at the dark window alongside her. "Your mom would have loved that," he said. He didn't say it often, not because he avoided it, but because he was careful with it, careful to use it when it was true and specific rather than as a reflex. This was true and specific. Emma was quiet for a moment. "Tell me something about her," she said. "Something you haven't told me yet." He thought. "She hated waiting for elevators," he said. "She'd always take the stairs unless it was more than 5 floors. She said elevators were a failure of patience." Emma smiled, a small one, private. How many floors was our building in Turin? 7, he said. Did she take the elevator? Every time, he said. She was pregnant with you. She said you'd suspended the rule. Emma's smile stayed. She looked at the dark window. I think I would have liked her, she said. Yeah, he said. You two would have been a lot. She leaned her head against his arm, which she didn't often do anymore. She was 8, she had opinions about independence. And he sat very still and let her, and the plane moved east through the dark over the ocean. Maranello in March was cold, but not Ohio cold, a sharper cold, cleaner, with the particular quality of northern Italian air that Mason had forgotten until he stepped off the plane in Bologna, and it came back immediately, the way smell always carries memory better than anything else does. Emma said, stepping onto the tarmac. It smells different here. Yeah, he said, it does. Marco met them at the facility the next morning. A compact, energetic man in his 40s who shook Mason's hand with both of his and looked at Emma with the specific delight of someone who'd been told about her and found the reality exceeded the description. Emma, Marco said, your father tells me you've been reading fluid dynamics. Computational fluid dynamics, Emma said. There's a difference. Marco laughed, genuinely surprised. Yes, he said. There is. He crouched down to her level. What questions do you have? Start with the most important one. Emma thought for exactly 2 seconds. What's the biggest mistake Ferrari made in the last generation of powertrain design, and how did you fix it? Marco looked up at Mason. She's 8, Mason said. I know, Marco said. He stood. He looked at Emma. Come with me, he said. I'll show you. They walked Emma through the facility for 2 hours. Not the public parts. The actual facility, the development floors, the modeling labs, the engineering spaces where the actual work happened. Emma walked with her notebook open and her colored pens rotating in her hand and asked questions that made 2 of the engineers they passed stop walking and engage, which turned into impromptu explanations that were clearly intended for Mason's 8-year-old daughter, but were more detailed than they needed to be because the engineers were talking about things they loved. Mason walked slightly behind, watching. He'd been here before. These corridors, these rooms, these people in different configurations, but this same spirit, the specific culture of a place where the work was the point and everything else was organized around that. He felt it come back into his body the way things that were once yours come back. Not foreign, but not the same either. Familiar with the distance of years in it, Luca Ferrante found him in the corridor outside the development floor at mid-morning. He was older, lines around the eyes, gray at the temples that hadn't been there. But he moved the same way he always had, with the forward-leaning energy of someone whose brain was always slightly ahead of where his body was. Mason, he said. They shook hands. It felt like a lot and not enough simultaneously. Luca, Mason said. Ferrante looked at Emma, who was 20 feet away being shown something on a tablet by Marco, fully absorbed. Your daughter? Yeah. She looks like someone who's going to be trouble for us in about 15 years. That's the plan, Mason said. Ferrante smiled. Then he looked at Mason seriously. I'm glad you came. I almost didn't, Mason said. Being honest. I know. Ferrante looked down the corridor. The team, the engineers on V6HY3, they've been working with your intercooler revision for 6 weeks. They know the name. They know the work. He looked back. I wanted you to know that. Marco mentioned. It's different hearing it here, Ferrante said. It was. Mason stood in the corridor of the building where he'd spent 8 years, in the place where the work he was most proud of had been done, and felt the weight of the years between then and now. Not as loss exactly, but as distance that had been real and was now navigated and was therefore part of the map. The V6HY3, Mason said. The mapping revision held. Ferrante's expression went to the place it went when he was talking about something technical that excited him. Lit, focused, specific. Better than held. The upper range response improvement was 12% in controlled testing. We're targeting 15 in the next iteration based on your methodology. He paused. We've been trying to replicate the CC bonding process without the original parameters. We've been getting close, but close isn't... I know, Mason said. Would you consider... Ferrante stopped, measured his words. Not permanently, not even regularly, but this program, the validation phase. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Maranello. walking the team through the original parameters. He looked at Mason. Your daughter would be welcome. He actually looked slightly uncertain, which was not an expression Mason had often seen on Luca Ferrante. We have a school affiliation program. Children of staff and visiting engineers. It wouldn't be boring for her. Mason looked at Emma, who had apparently said something that caused Marco and the two engineers around him to look at each other with the expression of people who needed to reconsider something. He thought about Danny, who could run the shop for 2 weeks, who had been running it better every year, who had the competence for it even if Mason had been slow to fully admit it. He thought about Scarlett, who was in Columbus being Scarlett, building what she was building, and with whom he'd talked every evening for the last 3 weeks, in the way people talk when they're figuring out what they are to each other by just being it. He'd called her from the hotel in Bologna last night. She'd answered on the second ring. How is it? She'd said. Familiar, he'd said. Complicated. Good. All three simultaneously? Yes. That tracks, she'd said. Emma asked the airport taxi driver about his car's suspension tuning, he'd said. She'd laughed. Of course she did. He knew less than she did, he'd said. She was very polite about it. She gets that from you, Scarlett had said. The politeness or the knowing more? A pause. Both probably, she'd said, and he could hear the smile in it. He thought about that conversation, and about Ferrante waiting, and about the 12-year-old version of himself who'd taken apart his first engine in a garage in Hartley, Ohio, with no idea where that curiosity would take him, and the 22-year-old who'd stood in this building for the first time feeling like he'd found the place where his particular way of thinking was useful, and the 32-year-old who'd left carrying a baby and a grief that didn't have a bottom for a while, and the 32-year-old now standing in the same corridor with a daughter who was 8, and already better at some of this than most adults he'd met. I'll think about it, he told Ferrante. Ferrante nodded. He'd apparently learned, in the years since they'd last worked together, when I'll think about it from Mason Cole was a soft no, and when it was a real maybe. This was a real maybe, and he knew it. 1. The preview event was that evening. Closed, 50 people, press and investors from Ferrari's trusted circle, and the V6 HY3 program team. They held it in one of the facility's presentation spaces, spare and modern, the prototype underlighting that made it look like a piece of sculpture, which it was, really, as much as it was a car. Mason stood at the back of the room with Emma next to him, and she put her hand in his without being asked, the way she sometimes did in rooms that were new, not from fear, but from the particular habit of wanting contact in unfamiliar places. Ferrante presented. He talked about the program, the architecture, the innovations, and at one point, with the specific precision of someone honoring something that deserved to be honored, he said, the hybrid powertrain system that underlies this program was originally developed and conceptualized by Mason Cole, who worked with this team a decade ago and whose foundational work made everything you're seeing tonight possible. Mason is here tonight. We're glad to have him back. 50 heads turned. Mason stood at the back of the room in a suit he'd bought in Columbus 2 weeks ago with Scarlett's input. She'd texted him a photo of a jacket and said this one, and he'd bought it without argument, and received the attention of 50 people without flinching from it. Emma squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. Afterward, people came to him. Engineers, press, investors, people he'd known before and people he hadn't. And he spoke to each of them with the steady patience he brought to everything, without performing importance and without hiding from it. An older journalist from a German automotive magazine shook his hand and said in accented English, "We heard you had disappeared," and Mason said, "I was in Ohio," as if that explained it, which for him it did. Luca found him near the end of the evening. "Well," he said. "It's an extraordinary car," Mason said. "It's your foundation," Ferrante said. "I mean that." "It's your decade of work on top of my foundation," Mason said. "That's more than the foundation." Ferrante shook his head. "You can't build on sand," he said. "You built on solid ground. That matters." Mason looked at the prototype under its lights. The car that existed in the world partly because of things he'd figured out at 22 in a small team in this building, things that had outlasted his presence here and kept developing and had arrived at this shape, this capability, this room full of people looking at it with the specific awe that very good engineering produces. I thought about what it meant to build something that outlasted you. Not in the death sense, in the living sense. The sense of having put something real into the world that kept going when you weren't looking. Emma was looking at the car with the expression she wore when she was thinking about something she wanted to understand completely. Dad, she said. Yeah. When they built on your foundation, did they tell you what they were doing over the years? No, he said. I wasn't in contact. So it just happened without you. Yeah. She looked at the car for another moment. That's actually better, she said. That means it was real. You built something real, and it kept being real without needing you to watch it. He looked at his daughter. That's what real things do, she said, still looking at the car. Simple. Certain. He put his hand on her shoulder. She leaned slightly into it. They were home in Ohio by Saturday. The shop opened Monday morning at 8. Danny had managed the week without catastrophe, and with one new long-term client he'd landed himself, a collector in Worthington with 3 classic American muscle cars, which he reported with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting for an opportunity to prove something and had gotten it. Nice work, Mason said. Danny shrugged. Told you I could handle it. I know, Mason said. I should have said it more. Danny looked at him for a moment, nodded once, then went to work. The Ferrari files continued. Mason had told Marco he'd consider the 2 weeks in Maranello for the V6 HY3 validation phase, and Marco had sent a proposed schedule, and Mason was looking at it with the calm of someone who'd already decided and was working out the details. He called his mother in Florida on a Sunday evening. I might need you for 2 weeks in May, he said. Emma. Maranello trip. His mother was quiet for a moment. He could hear the Florida sounds behind her, the particular quality of that air even through a phone. Mason, she said. I know. It's a lot to ask. It's not a lot to ask, she said. I've been waiting for you to ask something like this for years. A pause. You sound different. Different how? Less like you're managing, she said. More like you're living. He sat on the back porch of the house in the March, Ohio evening, the yard around him brown and stubborn still, the fence fully painted now, white and standing. Yeah, he said. Maybe. The woman, his mother said. Just that. No elaboration. He said nothing. Emma mentioned her, his mother said, in her last email. She emails me now, you know. She's been emailing me for 2 months. I didn't know that. She told me about the candle, his mother said. She said, and I'm quoting, I found the candle for the dinner because Ms. Hayes is someone worth the candle. Mason looked at the yard, at the tree, at the fence. I'll call you about the May dates, he said. His mother laughed, warm and entirely unsurprised. I'll be there, she said. Scarlett came on a Saturday in April. Not for business, not passing through. She drove from Columbus on a Saturday morning and pulled into the lot on Millworks Road and came into the shop where Mason was doing a straightforward oil change on a neighbor's old Honda that had been coming in for 12 years and was now more or less a regular appointment. She brought good coffee. She sat on one of the plastic chairs in the waiting area, the ones that didn't match, and read something on her phone while he finished the Honda, and when he came in, she handed him the coffee without ceremony, the way people hand each other coffee when it's already a habit. The Pittsburgh deal closed, she said. Yeah? Thursday. Brandt came back with a number 15% below his original ask. The milestones are structured around actual validated capability, not projected capability. She drank her coffee. Jian Park is going to run the technical side. It was part of the negotiation. You made that a condition. I suggested it strongly, she said. Brandt agreed faster than I expected. I think he knows. He knows what he has, Mason said. He said yes. She nodded. Something settled in her face. The specific satisfaction of a person who'd gotten the complex thing right and knew it. And the Ohio State program notified Emma she's in the advanced track, she said. She submitted a supplemental project portfolio. Apparently it was... The program director emailed me directly. She said she'd never seen a supplemental from an 8-year-old. Emma told you she submitted a portfolio? Emma emailed me, Scarlett said. Directly, 2 weeks ago. He stared at her. She has your number. She asked me for it at the shop in January, Scarlett said. I gave it to her. She's been emailing me engineering questions occasionally. She looked entirely calm about this. I answer them. He stood in the waiting room of his shop with his coffee and looked at this woman who drove 40 minutes on Saturdays and gave her number to his daughter and answered engineering questions and negotiated investment deals from the same clear-eyed foundation of knowing what was real and what wasn't. You could have mentioned that, he said. I didn't want to make it a thing, she said. It's a thing, Scarlett. She has good questions, she said. I learn something when I answer them. She looked at him steadily. Is that a problem? He thought about Emma at the kitchen table with the graph paper and the ruler. Emma on the plane saying, I want to build things that matter for people. Emma finding the candle. No, he said. It's not a problem. She held his gaze. Okay? Okay? He said. Outside on Millworks Road, a car went past slowly, and the sign above the door said, Cole's Auto and Repair with all its letters working. Inside, the coffee maker with the electrical tape was making its particular sound of water becoming something useful, and Danny was off on Saturdays, and the shop was quiet, in the way it was quiet on weekend mornings when the urgency of the week had not yet arrived. He sat down next to her, in the plastic chairs that didn't match, with the cracked coffee table between them and the stack of old magazines and the waiting room that was nobody's idea of impressive. She turned slightly toward him. Mason, she said. Yeah. I've been thinking about something you said. Months ago. She looked at the floor briefly, then back up. You said some things are worth less when you make them bigger. I remember. I've been thinking about that in relation to myself, she said. The company. The way I built it. Bigger and faster and more, because bigger and faster and more was how I outran the thing I was afraid of. She paused. I'm not afraid of that thing anymore. I haven't been for a while. But I kept going bigger because I didn't know what I was running toward. I only knew what I was running from. She looked at him. I think I know now what I'm running toward. He let that sit. It's not small, she said. I'm not going to pretend it's small. It's you and Emma and this shop and whatever we build from here. She said it like the engineer she'd always wished she was. Precise, honest, no decoration on the structure. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. And I know it, and I'm not going to pretend I don't know it. He looked at her in the bad fluorescent light of the waiting room, this sharp, direct, complicated woman who'd stood in his parking lot in November with the posture of someone who'd never once let herself be uncertain in public, and had somehow, over 4 months and 40-minute drives and shop coffee and Pittsburgh hotel lobbies and cheeseburgers and candles and engineering questions, let him see the person underneath all of that. Yeah, he said, it's everything. He reached over and took her hand. Same as the kitchen table, same gesture. No drama. Just there. She looked at his hand on hers and then at him. We're going to be complicated, she said. We already are, he said. The geography. We'll figure it out, he said. We've been figuring it out. Emma is going to have opinions about everything. Emma has always had opinions about everything, he said. That's established. She almost laughed. The almost laugh became the real thing, warm and unguarded and completely itself. And it went through the quiet of the shop and out into the April morning on Millworks Road, where the sign had all its letters, and the lot had its cracked asphalt, and the world outside was doing what the world outside always did, completely indifferent to what was happening inside, which was everything and nothing and the only thing that mattered. The oak in the backyard finally came back fully in May. Slow, the way oaks come back, not announcing it, but one morning just being green where it had been bare. Emma noticed before Mason did, which was not surprising. She pointed it out one morning through the kitchen window with the satisfaction of someone who'd been tracking a project. It's back, she said. Yeah, he said, it is. She looked at it for a moment, then at him. Are you happy? I thought about the shop and the sign and the tools and the Ferrari files and Maranello in March and Emma on the plane and Scarlett in the plastic chair and his mother coming in 2 weeks and Danny landing his own clients and the fence that was painted and the drawer that closed and the floorboard that no longer creaked and all the accumulated real weight of a life that had been broken and rebuilt and was still being built and would keep being built, which was not a problem, which was, in fact, the whole point. Yeah, he said, I am. Emma studied him with those clear eyes. Different kind than before? Same kind, he said, just more of it. She accepted this, decisive, the way she accepted things that were true. Climbed onto her bar stool, reached for her orange juice. Good, she said. He scrambled the eggs. The morning moved around them the way mornings do. Without ceremony, without announcement, just the ordinary accumulating weight of time that was, when you paid attention to it, the only extraordinary thing there ever was. Some men chased greatness across oceans. Some men built it quietly in the same place every day, in the work of their hands, and the raising of their children, and the slow, brave act of letting someone good come close enough to matter. Mason Cole had done both. I was still doing both. And for the first time in a long time, those two things were not in tension. They were simply, finally, the same life.